Good morning to everyone.
Good morning, Ambassador. Nice to see you.
Good morning, Jean-Luc.
Hi, good morning, India. How are you doing? Everything good? Okay.
Good and freezing.
Oh yeah, I saw that. I saw that on TV that it was freezing there. Oh God. And we are boiling.
Good morning.
Yeah.
Good morning, Åsa here. Good to see you all.
Good morning, Åsa. The president is going to join in 2 minutes. We were having a bureau meeting just before, so he's on his way.
Sure, we're here. Thank you.
All right, thank you.
Good morning, Jean-Luc.
Good morning, Anita. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Ready to go. Ready to roll.
Ready to go, indeed.
Good morning, everyone. This is Jukka speaking, the chair. Do we have the Secretary Jean-Luc online?
Yes, Mr. President, I'm here. Yeah.
Very good, very good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So please indicate when you think that we can start. I see that we are over 100 participants already, so we should have critical mass, and I think that, well, I saw sort of the ED also connected. Yes,
that's correct, Mr. President. I think we are ready to go whenever you want. The executive director is there, and the 2 deputies are there too, and the bureau is there. So I think we can, whenever you are ready, we can move on.
Okay, then let's start, because, well, we are all sort of, well, on a timeline, and since this is the first time that the annual session will be organized in a virtual format, so we will have to be very mindful of the timetable and the procedures. But anyway, good morning, dear colleagues, excellencies, and distinguished delegates. It's my pleasure to declare open this year's annual session of the UN Women Executive Board. Please allow me to acknowledge and welcome among us Madam Phumzile Mlambo Ngcuka, Under-Secretary General and Executive Director of UN Women. I also welcome to the virtual podium the following UN Women colleagues: Åsa Regner, Deputy Executive Director for Normative Support and Program Results, and Anita Bhatia, Deputy Executive Director for Resource Management, UN System Coordination, Sustainability and Partnerships, and of course, Jean-Luc Boris, the Secretary of the Executive Board. Our first point of order relates to the election of a new vice president of the executive board representing the Asia-Pacific group following the conclusion of His Excellency Ambassador Sukhbol Sukhi's tour of duty earlier this year. I wish to inform the executive board that the Asia-Pacific group has nominated His Excellency Mr. Vorshilov, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Mongolia to the United Nations for the position of Vice President of the Executive Board until the end of 2020. Does the Executive Board have any objections? I hear none. I have the pleasure, therefore, to declare Ambassador Vorshilov, Vice President of UN Women Executive Board, elected by acclamation. Congratulations, dear colleague. Taking this opportunity on behalf of the Executive Board, I would like to sincerely thank Ambassador Sukhi for his work and wish him every success in his future endeavors. We will now proceed with the opening of this session. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, colleagues, please allow me to welcome you all to the first ever virtually convened annual session of the UN Women Executive Board. I very much wish that we could meet sort of on actual UN premises, but this is really dictated by the circumstances, and I'm very thankful for everyone cooperating sort of during these unprecedented times. Let me begin by again congratulating the newly elected Vice President of the Executive Board, His Excellency Mr. Engbold Vorshilov, Permanent Representative of Mongolia to the United Nations. Ambassador, we look forward to continuing to work with you in this capacity. We begin this year with great expectations for commemorating 2020 as a milestone year for gender equality in a context entirely different from the one in which we are now living. We are yet to see the full extent of what will be for us the new normal. It is heartening to witness, however, UN Women's unwavering commitment, demonstrating flexibility and exercising its tripartite mandate in what is now a defining moment for the UN organization as a whole, in light of the global COVID-19 pandemic. As mentioned in our recent joint meeting of the executive boards, the UN is expected to be functioning at its best with effective and efficient coordination. The need to focus on already marginalized groups is all the more important. We should also consider the likely impact on public finances around the world and therefore on the entire direction of the United Nations development system reforms. I think that this is a defining moment for sort of the UN development system, and we really sort of have to be at our best and demonstrate that sort of by providing these sort of solutions with a global reach that usually only the UN can provide, we can really provide the best value for money in terms of development impacts and development efforts. Full recovery from this current crisis must pave the way to a more equal world, more resilient to future crises, whatever they may be. We are all sort of, I think, engaged with the idea that we should rebuild better. And of course, this is sort of about rebuilding greener, but this is also about sort of rebuilding a world that is more equal. We are aware that women are among those most affected by this pandemic, but they will also be instrumental to recovery in communities around the world. For this reason, it is critical that all response efforts place strategic emphasis on women and girls if we want to have concrete and sustainable results. Let us keep this in mind as we deliberate on the agenda items, including related draft decisions before us at this two-day session, which I trust will be a productive one that will lead to a successful conclusion. Without further ado, I now turn the floor over to the Undersecretary General Executive Director for her opening statement. Phumzile, the floor is yours, please.
Thank you, President. Excellencies, good morning, to distinguished delegates, guests, and colleagues. Let me start by wishing you and your loved ones good health. I'm very pleased that we are welcoming you to this first virtual annual session of the UN Women Executive Board. Although we miss our in-person meetings, we nevertheless are determined to forge ahead in this virtual platform. This situation has denied us many important events which were planned for the year 2020 in order to mark the 25 years of the Beijing Declaration. Notably, it denied us a very important CSW. We are hoping that we will be able to integrate many of the activities in the marking of generation equality, and later in the year when we mark Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security. So all is not lost, and I trust our collective resilience will make sure that we save anything that we can save of the important activities of this year. And let me start also by thanking the President and the Bureau for their exceptional support for our mandate. We have felt your solid strength behind us, including on special occasions, such as Finland's hosting of UN Women's first partner roundtable, and in the joint town hall of the executive boards on the 21st of April on system-wide COVID-19 response with our DSG and the WHO Director General. And I also recognize your important increased financial support Finland, and Finland now is our top donor. I thank you for this important contribution. Since the executive board met for the first regular session in 2020, which was on 14th of February, COVID-19 has changed the world. We have responded rapidly to the demands with agile reprioritization, which was enabled by flexibility granted by our partnerships with governments, donors, and other stakeholders that we collaborate with. Our work to end inequality and discrimination has never been so important and central to the work of the UN, especially protection of the gains made by women and girls, which are under threat. Our messages and our goals resonate with all those who are now also fighting to end injustices, including racial injustice or homophobia. The process of self-examination within and beyond our own organization that has accompanied the recent events in the US and elsewhere has been a healthy and rightfully uncomfortable process that we intend to continue. That place of discomfort is where change happens, and it is a trigger to build the diversity we need for the future. It is indeed part of building back better. It is easy to settle into the patterns that are building blocks of blatant and sometimes structural prejudices. But if we deal with the discomfort that dealing with it brings about, we begin the true constructive road. On July 2nd, next week, it will be 10-year anniversary of the establishment of UN Women by the UN General Assembly. As we approach that milestone, I hope you can celebrate with us in this new normal, but with purpose, and recommit to the revision, to the vision that was the vision that created UN Women. As the world focused on protecting populations against COVID-19, we had to reluctantly downscale or postpone important events like the Commission on the Status of Women, as I said earlier. And we've had to delay the hosting of Generation Equality Forum. We have, however, been able to resume our preparations for generation equality. Our action coalitions are coming together. We have already announced the leaders of the action coalitions. We continue with deeper engagement and readiness for 2021, undaunted by the pandemic, with more than 660 million people who are already connected on the social media and focusing on what they can do for generation equality. Distinguished members of the board, pandemics are not gender neutral, and COVID-19 pandemic has been no exception. It has strained health system, widened socioeconomic gaps, and shifted, in some cases, strategic funding priorities, all of which have disproportionately affected women and girls. In response, our efforts have been focused on violence against women, economic impact, women's leadership, gender data, and the burden of care and dangers of the digital divide. I must also add that there is a lot of grief out there with all the people that have passed as a result of the pandemic. Collectively, as the world, we have to see how we will deal with this grief. In our situation as UN Women, we have also focused on producing policy briefs on the issues that have framed the key areas of action, with recommendations that have provided valuable leadership and coalesced action within and outside the UN. We led the preparation of the Secretary General's policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on women, with inputs from multiple agencies, and provided gender analytical insight to support the UN framework for the immediate socioeconomic response to COVID-19. We were able to take swift action in part because you made this possible financially. I would like to thank all our partners who made early payments and increased contribution to regular resources this year. We have spent that money well, and I also appreciate your direct support to UN Women's Global Program on COVID-19, as well as UN COVID-19 Response and Recovery Multi-Partner Trust Fund. The UN Trust Fund is establishing a COVID-19 special window to bolster the core resources of current grantee organizations, as well as supports long-term interventions for women and girl survivors that are specific to the context of the pandemic. In partnership with the EU, UN Spotlight Initiative and the UN Trust Fund, they have already allocated $9 million to immediate support to women's organizations in sub-Saharan Africa, with a primary focus on institutional response, risk mitigation, and recovery. We also seek to influence new partners, including international financial institutions, so that their lending to countries for recovery has greater focus on women and girls. We are co-organizing roundtables with the multilateral development banks to support this important dialogue. The pandemic has a major impact on violence against women and girls services provision. To understand this better, UN Women undertook a rapid assessment in 49 countries across 5 regions. And we found that there is indeed an increase in the calls to helpline across countries and increases in violence against women reports to the police and health centers. Shelters operations are at a full capacity, and service providers are finding it difficult to maintain the services in place because of the demand. Survivors of violence against women have limited access to information and limited access to social services, health, legal, and protection services. And we have been able to raise alarm as a result. In response, we have also focused our efforts on integrating violence against women activities within national policy responses, ensuring access to essential services, driving data collection on the extent and impact of COVID-19 on gender-based violence, and providing direct support to women and civil society organizations. We have called for these services to be declared essential services during and beyond the fight against COVID-19. For example, in countries such as Cameroon, Central African Republic, Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, Mali, Niger, Nigeria, and Senegal, UN Women is strengthening access to essential and quality services for women survivors of violence during the pandemic. We are supporting partners to update referral pathways and service delivery protocols, including with the police and justice institutions in Bolivia, Ecuador, South Africa, Sudan, Trinidad and Tobago, and Vanuatu. Our influential shadow pandemic advocacy on violence against women has supported a global awareness of its power dynamics, its links to inequalities, and its prevalence in our societies. With our He for She campaign, we launched a targeted campaign called He for She at Home. There we have been able to engage by men around the world with 27 million impressions in different countries that exclude India, which had even higher impression than all the countries combined. And on economic impact. The economic impact of the pandemic is similarly grave. The World Bank has warned it could push up to 100 million more people into extreme poverty, of which the majority are likely to be women. Most women workers are concentrated in the sectors especially hard hit by COVID-19, in service industries like tourism, hospitality, and care industries, and then of course the medium and small enterprises as well as the informal sectors are also hard hit. They are experiencing employment losses, income security, and increases in their unpaid care work. Their jobs have been shown to be so critical for our survival and often undervalued, underpaid, or not paid at all. And this has to change in our building back better. Economic recovery will not be possible without additional and sizable fiscal stimulus packages, not only for the big industries, but also for the smaller businesses that women tend to be concentrated in. This has implications, therefore, for women, as it determines the volume of expenditure available for investing in gender equality. This has to concern us. By early May, at least 120 countries had put in place a fiscal response to COVID-19. Excuse me, Chairman, something has happened, but okay. By early May, at least 120 countries had put in place a fiscal response to COVID-19, totaling roughly $8 trillion. An initial review of these packages indicates that few, if any, were designed with a gender lens. and that too we are paying attention to, as it has the potential of leaving women behind. We have also been focusing on social protection, addressing food insecurity that affects women, as well as addressing the limited infrastructure that deny women critical services. In our response, we intend to respond to these gaps. We've also focused on leadership and participation of women. Women and women's organization must be included in the COVID-19 response. Planning to ensure planning and decision-making affects women positively. We have therefore invested in strengthening the women's organization, their bargaining power, as well as ensuring that the women who are in the front line responding to COVID are able to be given an opportunity to contribute effectively to how the crisis is being responded to. To address this, UN Women and the OECD convened the Women's Leaders Virtual Roundtable on COVID-19 and the Future. In the regions, we also convened and joined forces with the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, ECLAC, to also convene a high-level meeting of women ministers. In Africa, we also convened with the AU, bringing together women ministers to exchange experiences and lessons. That also included a focus on the global ceasefire called by the Secretary General, which was able to be tackled together with the AU's silencing of the guns campaign. We will continue and expand our direct support to women's organizations through UN Women Peace and Women Peace and Humanitarian Fund, the Spotlight Initiative, and the Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women, through adapting to new realities that constrain the many movements of women who have been active in the space. And then data. We have placed a premium on collecting data and data analysis and making sure that we can have data that is timely and able to influence our plans. This forms part of our pledge to support governments, the UN development system, and other stakeholders to understand and address the gendered impacts of the crisis. UN Women has partnered with WHO to produce and publish the most comprehensive sex disaggregated data available on health impact of COVID-19. The Women Count Data Hub has offered the first COVID-19 data by sex for 125 countries. We also are investing in rapid gender assessment surveys of the socio-economic impact of COVID-19 in 40 countries in collaboration with national partners and many UN agencies. UN Women is building a common UN system dashboard of gender indicators for the UN Multi-Party Trust Fund on COVID-19. We aim to create a central data hub on Women Count platform populated by data from all UN agencies. On UN reform, Excellencies, all of these activities I have highlighted show how much in fighting the pandemic we have been able to draw from the UN reforms and work collaboratively with other agencies. But further, we will make sure that we integrate our work in the decade of action to deliver for the from the SDGs in a manner that takes advantage of the new opportunities opened by the UN reforms. Our strategic UN system coordination mandate remains critical in fostering an integrated whole of UN system response, with UN Women providing thought leadership, coordination support on gender analysis. We also have expanded and deepened partnership both within and beyond the UN, continue to enable to achieve greater scale and impact to improve the lives of women and girls and address the humanitarian development nexus. With better arrangements for engagement with the humanitarian IAC, we could do even much more. Since the last update, as part of the work to bring a greater focus, quality, and create possibility to scale in our work, UN Women has successfully completed the pilot phase for quarterly portfolio review. This will enable us to plan further based on the lessons we have learned from this process. It is vital for UN Women to work even more closely with the UN system, as it has been underlined by you as member states at the recent joint meeting of the Executive Board. We have leveraged our system-wide mandates to lead and coordinate the UN's gender equality efforts. We now have 350 gender focal points engaged in pushing for gender parity and building an enabling environment across the UN system. I also want to thank the collaboration we've had with the International Gender Champions and congratulate them for their 5th anniversary. We are in the process of developing field-specific enabling environment guidelines to help increase representation of women in the field and accelerate efforts to reach parity. On the common chapter, distinguished members, we have taken notes of the joint statement delivered by Switzerland at the June 2020 session of UNDP, UNFPA executive boards on the future of our common chapter. UN Women has regularly been in discussion with other 3 common chapter agencies regarding the specifics of how we will be moving to work on the common chapter forward, and we will jointly agree on the way forward. Distinguished board members, I now would like to turn to the strategic plan 2018-2021. This year marks the midpoint in its implementation. I'm pleased to say that we are largely on track with a strategic plan that remains vital and relevant. Also outlined in my annual report, UN Women has achieved significant results in the last 2 years in the areas of legislative reform, humanitarian services for women and girls, gender responsive disaster plans, and even though I must also add we can do more there if we had better arrangements in our relationship with the interagency committee. We've also focused on decent work for women, embedding change in social norms, attitudes, and behavior in national plans and curricula to address violence against women and to improve protocols for quality service for survivors of violence, as well as influencing the peace process in partnerships with civil society. We have achieved good performance for 72% of the strategic plan indicators. At the same time, we also know that some areas are underperforming. We will need to redouble our efforts to meet our 2021 targets and achieve replicable, scalable results to avoid the pitfalls of funding fragmentation. Let me now address UN Women's financial position. I am delighted to state that in 2019, UN Women achieved its largest ever total revenue of $527.4 million with contribution from 106 governments. On behalf of the women and girls of the world, I want to thank you. The largest government contributors in 2019 were European Union Commission, Sweden, Norway, United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, Finland, Switzerland, Japan, Denmark, Canada, Australia, United States of America, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and the United Arab Emirates. A funding gap still exists. Other resources exceeded the integrated budget endorsed by the Executive Board by $117.4 million. However, there is still a shortfall in regular resources of $57 million, or 28.5% of budget projections. Our sustainability and our ability to deliver high quality and timely support depends on this healthy balance between core and non-core. This change in balance from 55% in 2011 to 29% in 2019 is of serious concern. It marks for the first time in history that our regular resources fell below the funding compact threshold of 30%. Voluntary contributions in 2019 totaled $500.4 million. This comprised $143 million in regular resources, a reduction of $7 million from 2018, and $357.4 million in other resources, which is an increase of $122 million from 2018. Now, core resources were considerably boosted by the EU UN Spotlight Initiative, with UN Women receiving $16 million. We count on the member states to help us to navigate this difficult but very important part of our work. I'm pleased to state that also we continue to make progress in diversifying our funding, with special focus on private sector partnership, as well as strengthened partnership with other UN agencies. In 2019, from private sector partners, we increased by 31% to reach $32.8 million, with revenue from interagency funding arrangements that grew by 44% to $72.4 million. It's important that you know you can trust us with your resources, because we have consistently demonstrated solid fiduciary management. In 2019, UN Women achieved 9th unqualified audit since inception. We are proud of that achievement, and we thank the team that works very hard to ensure we achieve these results. We recognize the vital importance of leveraging partnership in order to achieve the scale and impact we seek. And we are pursuing, with particular emphasis to generation equality, many different new options that would support the funding of our work, even if the funds will not necessarily come directly to us. One of our creative partnerships is with our Unstereotype Alliance, which engages the marketing and advertising industry. This year so far has been unprecedented in its demands on UN Women, on our staff, who have been able to be resilient in difficult times, our partners, our member states, so many of whom are still fighting to control the coronavirus in their own countries. Just last week, we joined across the entity in a memorial service of one of our beloved representatives at the UN Multi-Country Office in Caribbean. Mrs. Alison McLean passed, and nothing speaks more of her highly committed service to the work of the UN, in that she actually literally was at work until the last day, after having been sick for a very long time. And we reaffirm the values that drive us to serve the women and girls of the world in the manner in which Alison did. We commit to tackle the scourge of racism inside and outside the UN with reconsidered effort. Now, more than ever, we remain focused on our mandate, and we continue to count on your solidarity, ensuring that we will build back better together. Thank you. I'm sorry for being so long, President.
Well, thank you, Edie Phumzile. It is always a pleasure to listen to you, so you do not need to apologize, and thank you very much for your informative and comprehensive remarks. I think that actually one of the essential things during our annual session is getting your sort of in-depth overview on what is happening. And can I just echo sort of, your remarks on how important it was to reach the 500 million milestone. That was an important achievement for UN Women. And you know, no one really ever wishes for a crisis to happen, but once a crisis happens in a way that it can be a catalyst for both sort of negative changes and positive changes. And let's hope that we can use this crisis in terms of sort of, engineering positive change and a positive change that will not only build a greener future, but a more equal future. And that's why sort of, and I'm very impressed by the expertise that UN Women holds as an organization. And I think that the high goal that we need to set ourselves is really make sure that sort of, all UN policy, all UN work is sort of guided by a very strong gender lens. And sort of nothing should really happen without sort of subjecting policy to a very strong gender lens, ensuring that sort of it will promote gender equality. And that's why sort of we really need to build on the UN Women's strength in terms of its normative capacity in sort of delivering sort of advice that will sort of lead to actionable policy within the whole UN system. So ED, I think that I can speak for the whole board saying that you have our sort of wholehearted support in this work. But thank you. The executive board will now turn to agenda item 1, organizational matters for the adoption of the annotated provisional agenda and work plan for the current session and the report of the first regular session held in February this year. Without further ado, I now invite the Secretary of the Board, Mr. Jean-Luc Boris, to outline the agenda of the session table for adoption. Mr. Secretary, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Good to see you all on the screen. And good morning, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, and colleagues. In the interest of time, and since the Executive Director in her statement has already covered the briefing on the response to COVID-19 pandemic and the update on the implementation of the General Assembly Resolution 72 to 79 on the repositioning of the United Nations Development System, there will be no further presentation on those two topics. Therefore, right after my intervention, under agenda item 1, there will be a joint presentation by the two Deputy Executive Directors, Ms. Anita Bhatia and Ms. Asa Ragnar, on the progress made on the Strategic Plan 2018-2021, including the midterm review. Then the floor will be open for Member States' intervention, managed today by a speakers list. By the way, I've been informed that we have 17 speakers inscribed on the list at the moment. After that, the relevant UN Women colleagues here on the virtual podium will be invited to respond to the questions accordingly. At 1 p.m., if the speakers list is not finished, we will adjourn the morning session for the lunchtime. As per established practice, the lunchtime is reserved for informal consultation on the draft decisions. Negotiation will take place with respect to the following 4 decisions. Decision 2020/3 on the annual report of the Executive Director and the midterm review, 2020/4 on the report on the evaluation function of UN Women, 2020/5 on the report on audit, internal audit and investigation activities, and 2020/6 on UN Women policy and procedures to tackle sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment. And the facilitators are respectively for those decisions, Finland, Sierra Leone, Georgia, and Mongolia. I thank them for their work on that. The afternoon session will begin, if we need, at 3 p.m. to keep going on the speakers list until it is exhausted. Once the speakers list is finished, we will directly go back into informal consultation on the 4 draft decisions. This will be it for today. Moving to tomorrow, the second day of the annual session will begin with an update on the implementation of recommendations contained in the independent victim-centered review of the UN Women policy and processes on tackling sexual exploitation and abuse and sexual harassment, and as noted in the related management response under the agenda item on policy and program matters. Then the board will move to item 5 on audit and investigation, where the board will hear the following presentations. One, the report on internal audit and investigation for 2019. Also the presentation on the report of the advisory committee on oversight and the management responses. The board will then have the opportunity to react to both agenda item on item 4 and 5 and ask questions to the panel. Moving to item 6 on evaluation, the board will consider the report on the evaluation function of UN Women for the year of 2019 and the management response, as well as a revised evaluation policy of UN Women. The floor will again be open on those topics for question and answer. The morning session of the Executive Board will be adjourned at 1 p.m. and we will again, during the lunchtime, as needed, negotiate the draft decision if we haven't concluded. Hopefully we have. Upon conclusion of the negotiation on the draft decision, the board will turn to agenda item 7, other matters, and we will take action on the draft decision by adopting them. Finally, we will come back to agenda item 1, organizational matters, and the board will consider the approval of the provisional agenda and the work plan for the next session, the second regular session in September 2020. The annual session will conclude with closing remark, of course, as always, Mr. President, with the closing remark of the Executive Director and your closing remarks. I would like also, Mr. President, if I may continue with a clarification on the documentation.
Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. President. Regarding the availability of documents in all UN languages, as previously mentioned in email, we were informed by the UN Department for the General Assembly and Conference Management that in the midst of processing the document, the GSCM capacity was curtailed due to the ongoing liquidity crisis. As a result, they were required to reprioritize their entire workload in a staggered manner for all upcoming official meetings. And therefore, part of our documentation was translated late. And we apologize for that, as well as the Secretariat asked me to convey their apologies for this unforeseen delay. I can confirm, however, that by now, all official documentation related to the annual session have been issued in the 6 languages and are available on our website. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and to your team for sort of preparing our work. And may I now take that the Executive Board now wishes to adopt the annotated provisional agenda and work plan for the annual session 2020. I hear no objections, so it is decided. Thank you. And the agenda and work plan as adopted will guide us for the rest of the session. Let us now turn to the adoption of the report of the first regular session 2020. May I take it that the Executive Board wishes to adopt the report of the previous session? I hear no objections, so it is decided. And now we can turn to agenda 3, report of the Undersecretary General Executive Director of the United Nations Entity for Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women on progress made on the strategic plan 2018 to 2021, including the midterm review. I would like to welcome the following UN Women colleagues to join the virtual podium along with the Executive Director and Deputy Executive Directors as follows. Sarah Hendricks, Director of the Policy Program and Intergovernmental Division, Aparna Mehrotra, Director of the UN System Coordination Division, Moez Doraid, Director of the Management and Administration Division, Dan Seymour, Director of the Strategic Partnership Division, Prasun Chakraborty, Director ad interim of Human Resources, Anna-Karin Jatfors, Director and ad interim of the Strategy Planning Resources and Effectiveness Division, and Sebastian Rothmeier, Advisor for Change Management. I would now like to invite the two Deputy Executive Directors to give us a joint presentation. I will give the floor first to Ms. Regner and then followed by Ms. Bhatia. So the floor is yours, Åsa.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and good morning and good afternoon, good evening to everybody present today. So it is mine and my colleague Anita Bastia's absolute pleasure to share this presentation to you. The high-level key findings of the midterm review of UN Women's strategic plan. I will go directly into slide 2 in the interest of time, because I know we want time for the discussion, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair. So our main finding is that the priorities laid out in our current strategic plan remain vital and relevant in the context of Beijing 25. And as we work to respond to the changes caused by COVID-19, and the Executive Director alluded a lot to the work we've been doing on that and the COVID knowledge that we have accumulated. And obviously we will have to use that to inform ourselves in future and in preparing the future strategic plan. The Beijing 25 review, as you know, and the Executive Director also mentioned that this year was supposed to be the big year of celebrations. We will celebrate and we will discuss in depth and breadth the future gender equality agenda in the ways she laid out. But we do see that, as you know, we took stock of the Beijing Plus 25 developments. And we did see some interesting changes and shifts in the global gender equality landscape, and also when it comes to both progress and in some cases lack of progress when we took stock of the advancement or no advancement in relation to the Beijing goals. You might remember that there were some clear progress, for instance, on girls' education, girls' enrollment in school, as well as sinking maternal mortality levels. We also saw much better legislation in many countries when it comes to violence against women, for instance, against FGM, as well as other reforms in these areas, as well as when it comes to parental leave. Actually, more than 90 countries have some kind of provision for fathers and mothers to take parental leave with their small babies and children. Some of the issues, in some of the areas, we did see stalling progress, however, or even reversals of gains. And we saw some obstacles. One of the obstacles that we noted is that rising inequalities and economic exclusion in the world in general, symptoms of development levels in which gains are not shared equally, that we could see had an impact on women's poverty. And we know that women who are aged between 25 and 34 in the world are 25% more likely than men in the same age group to live in extreme poverty. Another observation that we had is a political one. We see that pushback against gender equality is becoming stronger, and we have discussed that at several occasions in the board meetings too. The third observation is the climate crisis that we have to deal with, which was and environmental issues were perhaps not so prominent in the current strategic plan. We have to deal with that. The fourth observation is that women remain significantly underrepresented or even locked out of strategic decision-making in many spheres. For instance, it's still 75% of all the parliamentarians in the world that are men. The fifth observation, violence against women and girls remain on high levels in reality, although the better legislation and other reforms are in place nowadays, which was not the case 25 years ago. We also see that women's movement and young women's movements, not least around the world, are increasingly calling for systemic change. At the same time, we see that there is shrinking space for women's organizations as well as for other civil society organizations. So we will take all of this into account and of course also the COVID knowledge. So we will continue to work to dismantle structure barriers, change discriminatory practices and legislation, and also tackle the feminization of poverty, which the ED also described in the aftermath of the COVID strategy. Also, key cross-cutting elements of our work will be to better contribute to social norm change, and also, of course, ensure that no one is left behind, as you mentioned, Mr. Chair. All of this has to go hand in hand with the SDG Decade of Action and the Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. Our next main finding from the MTR is that we are on track to achieve the results of our current strategic plan, which of course is very good. In general, there is good progress towards 2019 milestones, and we even attain an attainment of 2021 targets for 18 of the 51 development results output indicators. So more specifically, 72% of all accessible output indicators show at least 90% progress. This includes both development results and organizational effectiveness and efficiency output indicators. Today, after 10 years of existence, we have made significant efforts, we believe, to enhance our programmatic focus in order to be more effective and to the point. And we intend to intensify these efforts. One thing I want to mention to you in this is the flagship programs. We've discussed them many times also at the board meetings. They have played a key role in enhancing UN Women's programmatic focus by providing more specific thematic areas than in previous strategic plans. They've also contributed to greater prioritization and better partnerships. So secondly, going forward, UN Women aims to focus on the generation of better data and evidence and the use of systematic approaches to address the structural causes of gender inequalities, and the ED described this as well. For instance, through the country gender equality profiles, UN Women aim to strengthen national understanding and data on the advancement of international, region and national committees. Also, we want to be better at planning for results, including through cross-thematic approaches, and to be better at measuring our impact. We have made efforts to better capture efforts, as you know, also to leave no one behind, and we will continue to strive for more evidence-based interventions which are inclusive and achieve sustainable results for all women and girls. Also, UN Women intend to be more effectively program across the humanitarian development and peace nexus. I think that the COVID situation has also put light on this, and women's leadership in building peaceful, resilient, inclusive societies and to be working across the nexus is very much needed now more than ever as conflicts and humanitarian crises become more complex, protracted, violent. So thank you. That was my part of the presentation, Mr. Chair. So I give the floor, of course, back to you. And I think Ms. Bhatia is prepared to continue the presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Åsa. And now I will give the floor to the other Deputy Executive Director. So Anita, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. Let me speak to the third slide in our presentation today. And thank you also for the first few, for your narrative on the first few slides. Let me go now to the third important finding of the midterm review. And this concerns what we have learned to date about UN reform And I think we can say that UN reform has actually brought about really positive changes for UN Women's ability to fulfill its mandate. We have played and we will continue to play a very active role in UN reforms in ensuring, as you said, Mr. President, that the UN system collectively and effectively promotes the human rights of all women and girls. What we are seeing as a result of UN reform is that there is actually a greater focus on and a much greater demand for our services and for our coordination mandate at the country, regional, and at the global levels. Some of this was described by our executive director in her opening remarks. So let me just focus on a couple of key messages and key factoids that I would like you to remember after this presentation. First, we see quite a lot of growing opportunities for UN Women to engage with UN country teams, including especially through the resident coordinators' offices. And we see that this work takes the shape of joint advocacy, joint programming, participatory and consultative planning and implementation of the CCSAs, of the UN SCDFs. And all of this, we believe, is actually leading to much more cohesive and coherent interventions on gender. Second, gender equality is actually the area which has the highest level of collaboration under the Common Chapter and within the broader UN system. And third, an interesting factoid is that in 2019, UN Women actually received $106 million of its non-core resources, which, as you heard earlier, went up significantly last year, from interagency pooled funds. And we think the interagency pooled funds are actually a very effective mechanism for us to promote integrated approaches to supporting the implementation of issues on gender equality and on the implementation of Agenda 2031. It really does improve aid coordination and coherence and helps to reduce the silos between development, humanitarian, and peace-building assistance. And the other important and interesting fact is that these interagency pooled funds have actually gone up substantially. And in fact, we saw a 230% increase from 2018. But this should not make us complacent, because the truth is we still have some issues to deal with. First of all, the current funding landscape and generally the competition for resources presents a challenge to optimal collaboration among UN entities. We see this very visibly on the ground. And so an appeal to all of you is that we have to make the funding compact real. So unless funding and financing practices change, the continuing competition for scarce resources are going to remain an obstacle for more joined up, coherent approaches and for more joint programming. Now, how are we addressing this? Of course, we're trying to do this through structured dialogues on financing, on joint informals on the funding compact, through the high-level committee on management. We are trying to improve the quality of funding and the quality of our joint results. We are undertaking analytical work in-house to see how can we better report on joint results. And we urge donors to continue to support these efforts. And for our part, we will do the best to work particularly closely with UNDP, UNFPA, and UNICEF under the Common Chapter of our strategic plans. And to do this even better than we have done to date, we will be launching, as part of our coordination mandate, a series of strategic dialogues with our partner UN agencies to really discuss in some detail how can we work more effectively on the ground level. Next slide, please. Partnerships are critical to the way we work, because without this agenda is too big for us to do alone. These are a key enabler for us to achieve scale and impact. And one big finding from the MTR is that we've done a pretty good job of building a series of different kinds of partnerships, but these need to be expanded and deepened. So we are actually going to work very systematically on better leveraging our partners to deliver for and with women and girls, so that we can actually achieve greater scale and frankly sustainability for some of our crucial partnerships. I think it would be fair to say that UN Women enjoys unparalleled relationships, and unparalleled access to civil society and the women's movement. You will be interested to know that we did a mapping of our footprint and our connection to civil society, and the map, which we'd be happy to share, shows that with the exception of 4 small Pacific Island states, we actually have deep connections with civil society in every country in the world. And we have leveraged this for driving the agenda on gender equality. For example, generation equality and the action coalitions are the epitome of successful multi-stakeholder partnerships. And we are really looking forward to working together through that initiative to deliver transformational results. Let me mention just a few other initiatives. The executive director alluded to He for She at Home, which builds on the original He for She campaign. But let me also mention the Unstereotype Alliance, which allows us to influence a much broader constituency outside the UN system by working through the private sector and with advertisers and marketing companies. Let me also mention the Women's Economic Empowerment Principles, which goes to the heart of how do you transform business and the private sector through the adoption of gender-responsive practices. And in many parts of the world where the private sector is the largest contributor to GDP, this is really an important approach because it allows us to influence change in corporations, but also in their supply chain, in their distributor chain, in their employee chain. So these kinds of innovative partnerships are really helping us to push the agenda further. I would be remiss if I did not mention that we have started, as the executive director mentioned, to engage with partners in the international financial systems because they are the single most important source of financing, particularly for the stimulus packages. We have begun this work and we will continue to deepen and scale this up because we believe that influencing the flow of other people's funding will play a critical role in accelerating SDG 5. We will also continue to work and through our national committees, learning from the examples of other agencies like UNICEF, which have done an absolutely brilliant job of leveraging individual donors, and we will try to do that. But here we will need capital and investment because without investing in the national committees, we will not be able to achieve the scale and sustainability that is needed. We will continue, therefore, to push on partnerships so that gender equality becomes everybody's job, women, girls, men, and boys. Next slide, please. And this is the last slide. The key findings of the MTR that you've heard about today will feed into our next strategic plan. And we have, as the president mentioned, with us, Anna-Karin Hjärtfors, the interim director of the Strategic Planning Unit, which, as many of you know, is a new division in UN Women. And this new strategic plan 2022 to 2025 will address the following key principles. First, a strategic recalibration and a pivoting of our work to effectively respond to the new political, economic, and social challenges that we see. Our executive director likes to say that, we went to sleep one day and we woke up and the next day the world was a different place. It is a very different place. And so our strategic plan will actually need to address the emerging needs that we see from the COVID-19 crisis. Of course, we have already started, as Åsa said, to address this in our policy work, but we see very fundamental shifts in the gender equality landscape over because of COVID, and these transformations, which are the huge slipping back into poverty of many women, the feminization of poverty, the increased fragility, the increased digital divide, will need to be addressed and will be addressed in our new strategic plan. Second, key point is that UN Women aims to strengthen our position as a knowledge-based organization so that we are the go-to institution on gender equality. When people think gender equality, they think UN Women. We are continuing to do this by driving for impact, and that means we have to make some internal changes as well. That means we will build a more powerful UN Women, which will be matrixed and networks. We have to close some of the gaps that currently exist between our global work and our regional work, and we have to tighten the connections between our field office structures and our global structures. And this view of maturing as we enter UN Women 2.0 and our next decade into a globally networked and matrixed organization will allow us to share best practices from one region with another, take advantage of technological innovations in one country and carry that information to another country. So this review of our organizational structure and this enhancing of our institutional structure will be fundamentally important to building and driving for better results and better impact, because without that sharing of knowledge and without that matrixing and without that networking, we will lose a lot of opportunities to learn from each other. Finally, we want UN Women to be known as the place for key transformative results on gender equality, which we can do through standardizing our products so that we can better build out information, data, evidence, and knowledge, and take that from one country to another. For example, on gender equality profiles, we can do these systematically across the world. National action plans for women, peace, and security systematically across the world. In order to do this, we also need to be able to sit back, reflect, analyze our portfolio, and see what needs to be changed. So in COVID, we have undertaken a strategic reprioritization exercise, a business impact assessment to see where do the changes need to be made. And as the executive director mentioned, we have undertaken our first pilot portfolio review in the Asia Pacific region. We will be rolling this out across the world so that we have a clear picture of our portfolio of interventions and can clearly identify where we need to strengthen quality and how strengthening that quality can bring greater coherence in our portfolio, but most importantly, deliver transformational results for women and girls of the world. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Well, thank you so much, Anita, and thanks to both Deputy Executive Directors, Åsa and Anita, for your presentations. And now it is time to turn to the member states. And before opening the floor for your statements, I wish to gently remind delegations that the time limit set for delivering statements during the general discussion is 4 minutes for group statements and 2 minutes for individual delegations. We need to make efficient and optimal use of the time given the constraints of a virtual session. So I apologize, I will be clocking you, and once sort of the time is passed, that your microphone will be cut. But delegations are invited to email your full statements to papersmart4@un.org, and so which means in a way that you can focus sort of your oral interventions with the trust in a way that every word and every comma of your written statement will be available on the portal. All presentations made by the Secretariat will be kept to a minimum, as all documents have since been posted online for 4 weeks prior to the session. Let's try for an interactive discussion to the extent possible. For the ease of managing the speakers list, all participants are requested to add their country, UN agency affiliations before their names. Permanent representatives, deputy permanent representatives, and chargé d'affaires are kindly requested to also add their titles, PR, DPR, or CDA as appropriate after their names. And you may all now click the raise hand icon, but I understand that we already have a fairly well organized speakers list. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to the first speaker on my list, who is Her Excellency Anna-Karin Eneström, the PR of Sweden, who will deliver a cross-regional statement. So Anna-Karin, the floor is yours and the clock is running.
Thank you very much, Chair Jukka, and I have the honor to speak on behalf of Austria, Bulgaria, Canada, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, Georgia, Germany, Hungary, Iceland, Israel, Italy, Korea, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Madagascar, Mexico, Moldova, Morocco, the Netherlands, Norway, Peru, Switzerland, the United Kingdom, and my own country, Sweden. We thank the Executive Director Pumzile for her statement, and appreciation also to Åsa and Anita for their presentations. As you have said, Executive Director, the 2020 was to be a super year for women equality. Now we see all over the world the COVID-19 pandemic causing dramatic implications for gender equality and women's and girls' enjoyment of all human rights. Women and girls are already overrepresented among those furthest behind and most excluded, and disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. It is in times like this that our investment in human rights, democracy, the rule of law, and gender equality are needed more than ever, and require our increased and sustained attention. We support UN Women's triple mandate in full and welcome the high delivery of results in 2019 and halfway through the implementation of the strategic plan. We also welcome the enhanced efforts of UN Women in delivering results for those most marginalized, leaving no one behind. We commend UN Women's work to ensure that gender equality and women's empowerment is at the heart of UN reform, and that the commemoration of the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Platform of Action builds on dialogue and collaboration with a multitude of stakeholders. We look forward to embarking on the action coalitions and fully entering the era of generation equality together. But before going forward, we want to look back at your work during the initial phase of the pandemic. We commend you for your support of women's rights organizations, your advocacy and accountability for gender equality, and empowering women's meaningful leadership all levels. We look forward to learning more about your response efforts at country level as part of the UN country teams. This will be essential for helping to build back better and more equally from the COVID-19 crisis. We appreciate UN Women's vital role in coordinating with other UN agencies and ensuring gender is mainstreamed effectively across the work and appeals. This close collaboration is vital in mitigating the deepening inequalities that the pandemic presents. As we celebrate UN Women's 10th years anniversary and 20 years of Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, we applaud the historic achievements of fully financed budget. The decline in proportions of regular resources as part of UN Women's income does, however, remain a matter of concern. Hence, we encourage member states and UN Women to find the best practices to increase flexibility and predictability of funding and multi-year commitments. We agree with the area identified for improvement as part of the midterm review, and we will, with great interest, follow your efforts, including in addressing issues related to management and uneven capacity at country level. We also welcome and encourage UN Women's continued work on social norms, including engagement with youth, men, boys, and on eliminating discriminatory legislation. The next strategic plan must be grounded in human rights-based approach, leaving no one behind, with the crisis as a lever to build back better, greener, and more equal, and come back stronger. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anna-Karin, for your statement. And next, it is my pleasure to give the floor to His Excellency Vorsilov Enkbold, the PR of Mongolia and the Vice President of UN Women. So, dear colleague, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, President. At the outset, I would like to thank the Executive Director of the UN Women for her very comprehensive statement. My delegation strongly supports the mandate of the UN Women and welcomes the progress specified in the annual report. When COVID-19 struck the world, it threatened to reverse the progress made in achieving gender equality and women empowerment. This pandemic has major socioeconomic consequences on the most vulnerable people. Globally, women make up 70% of the health workforce and more likely to be frontline health workers. Domestic violence and violence against women and children have increased during the lockdown in every corner of the world. Therefore, Mongolia is proud to be among 145 nations who fully support the UN Secretary General's appeal on the gender-based violence and COVID-19. Although considered as a high-risk country, Mongolia has had one of the best COVID-19 responses with no recorded deaths nor local transmissions. The confirmed cases in Mongolia are all imported through repatriation of our citizens. This success was due to timely precautionary measures and physical responses by shutting the air and land borders, closing down the schools, and suspending the traditional New Year celebrations in January month. Nonetheless, we could not escape the socio-economic consequences of the pandemic outbreak. We have been closely cooperating with the coordinated UN system under the leadership of the UN resident coordinator in order to address the violence against women and children during the lockdown. Together, we have organized a series of awareness raising campaigns and opened new one-stop service centers for the victims of the domestic violence in 2 districts of the capital city of Ulaanbaatar. Mr. President, in those unprecedented circumstances, UN funds and programs, including UN Women, could adjust their activities to a new normal thanks to their regular resources. My delegation wishes to urge the member states to increase their contribution to the regular resources that allow flexibility to allocate funds when and where they are needed. I'd like to take this occasion to thank the contributors and donor countries for their generous support. In conclusion, I wish to emphasize that we look forward to continuing fruitful cooperation with UN Women and express our strong commitment to achieving the UN Sustainable Development Goals. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, dear colleague. And again, I had some hesitation in sort of cutting a vice president, but next on my list is sort of another vice president, Her Excellency Ms. Victoria Suleimani, Deputy Permanent Representative of Sierra Leone. So the floor is yours, Victoria, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the African Group. At the outset, I wish to convey our most sincere and heartfelt condolences to member states and indeed to families that have lost loved ones to the COVID-19. We thank you, Mr. President, and members of your Bureau for the hard work and commitment to the work of UN Women Executive Board, despite the extraordinary circumstance we are facing right now. Madam Executive Director and your team from the Secretariat will equally commend your effective support in organizing this annual session and of course to the way you are responding to COVID in our countries. We appreciate the very informative opening remarks by you, Mr. President, and the Executive Director earlier today. Mr. President, COVID-19 is an existential threat for humanity. As the character of the virus evolves, protecting lives and livelihoods has become a huge challenge for our nations. The impact of this global emergency is creating added challenge to the already existing inequality faced by vulnerable populations, particularly women and girls. As Africa struggles to contain the virus, its economic and social impact grows. The lack of containment globally and in Africa is aggravating economic inequalities faced by women. COVID-19 is indeed accentuating disruption to the promise of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in Africa and Africa's 2063 Agenda on Gender Equality and the Empowerment of Women and Girls. We remain committed to mainstreaming gender in our national responses to COVID-19. We cannot agree more with the SG's call to action for the inclusion of gender perspective in the designing of COVID-19 response and recovery programs. We therefore reiterate our firm commitment to safeguarding progress made towards achieving gender-related sustainable development goals. We commend AU's swift action to establish a COVID-19 response fund to support a sustainable medical response to the pandemic and mitigate its socioeconomic impact in its member states. We equally commend the African supportive role to the AU on the conceptual framework on response and recovery guidelines. We are aware of the horrifying increase in violence against women exacerbated by schools closure and curtailed economic activities, which has confined people to spending more time together in sometimes reduced spaces and therefore increase the likelihood of girls becoming pregnant and staying out of school. COVID-19 has just confirmed that we in Africa need robust statistical systems that will accurately collect data to inform evidence-based decisions on all issues affecting our women and girls. Mr. President, this pandemic threatens Africa's progress, and it is aggravating long-standing inequality, heightening hunger, malnutrition, and vulnerability to disease. We also appreciate the enabling role of UN Women in enhancing efficiency in its response and recovery plan to tackle the impact of the pandemic on women and girls in our continent. We therefore cannot agree more that global solidarity is what we need as we forge ahead to halt the spread of this virus. We also take note of the efforts of heads of other UN specialized agencies in the realignment of their interpolicies for a huge paradigm shift to strengthen UNDS reforms. Africa is looking forward to a more concerted effort for a coordinated response for a gender-responsive approach to address gender-based and domestic violence, trafficking in girls, poverty, hunger, job losses for women, sexual exploitation, child marriage, and teenage pregnancies. We believe there is no one agency to respond alone. Therefore, we call on all to scale up and reaffirm their sustained commitment for immediate response to deprivation through a stronger gender-responsive lens. We are further calling on UN agencies, country teams, peacekeeping operations, and humanitarian workers to provide the much-needed support to UN Women's Socioeconomic Recovery Plan for women and girls in Africa. We also commend the efforts of the African Women Networks and many other civil society organizations for their remarkable work of support on the ground in Africa. We call for a renewed coordinated global effort in the fight against the negative nexus of gender inequality in Africa. We appeal for international cooperation in resource mobilization for the work of UN Women globally and particularly for Africa. Mr. President, I conclude. We want to reiterate that the current health crisis and its impact on the African society needs stronger social partnership to enable Africa to develop and implement policies and systems for the empowerment of African women as encapsulated in Agenda 2063. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vice President, for your statement. And next, I will give the floor to Ambassador Jonathan Allen from the UK, making a statement for a group of countries. And you have 4 minutes. Jonathan, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. And I have the honor of delivering this statement on behalf of the following 31 member states: Australia, Austria, Belgium, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Canada, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Georgia, Germany, Iceland, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Lebanon, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Moldova, Montenegro, Mexico, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Peru, Sierra Leone, Sweden, Switzerland, and my own country, the United Kingdom. And as you've asked us to, I present here a shortened version with the full version of my statement uploaded on Papersmart. Madam Executive Director, COVID-19 has underscored the urgency to reinforce and deliver the international community's joint commitment to achieve the SDGs, which includes improving access to universal health coverage. We must not roll back on the important progress we've made so far. And in the decade of action, we must establish mechanisms to prevent future pandemics, and we must bolster emergency planning and preparedness worldwide. UN Women is a crucial actor in this response. So allow me to set out 3 areas which we see as being critical for an effective response and a sustainable recovery from the wide-ranging impacts of this global pandemic. First, coordination. We're committed to a coordinated global effort to stop the spread of COVID-19 and address the devastating humanitarian, health, and social and economic impacts. We urge agencies to work coherently together at all levels and in accordance with their comparative advantages. The UN response to the COVID-19 pandemic is a litmus test for UN development system reform. Ensuring it is a success requires well-coordinated funding mechanisms, and we've been delighted to see how fast the system has responded with standing up the Strategic Preparedness and Response Plan, the Global Humanitarian Response Plan, and the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Multi-Partner Fund. We encourage all agencies to practice interagency coordination by putting forward joint proposals through these mechanisms. Second, inclusion and prioritization. We know that the COVID-19 pandemic is having a disproportionate impact on women and the most vulnerable, in particular, children, older persons, and persons with disabilities. The COVID-19 response and efforts to build back better must follow a human rights-based approach, include the voices of marginalized groups, and ensure that no one is left behind. Recovery measures must aim at strengthening resilience and sustainability through more effective policies, including a gender perspective and investments that will contribute to realizing the 2030 Agenda and the Paris Agreement on climate change. Further, we note the importance of the continuity of all essential health services, including sexual and reproductive health services. We must ensure that internationally recognized human rights, including the right to health, are respected, protected, and progressively realized during the crisis. This pandemic has required an immediate and significant shift in agencies' operations. We're keen for our UN partners to communicate their efforts underway to reprioritize and pivot programs and existing resources in response to the current crisis. Third, sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. We commend the resilience and commitment of UN development and humanitarian workers who continue to assist vulnerable populations in their efforts to reach the furthest behind first. In the face of significant upheaval, the UN must continue to ensure its programs, actions, and behaviors remain grounded in respect for human rights, gender equality, and the responsibility to do no harm. And finally, Madam Executive Director, as members and observers of the Executive Board, we look forward to continuing to engage with you on your agency's response to COVID-19, including the implications for your financial situation, programming, and operations. We call on UN Women to continue to proactively update and engage the Executive Board on the COVID-19 response. Thank you, Madam Executive Director and Mr. President.
Thank you, Jonathan, so much for sort of keeping time. That was a perfect sense of your 4 minutes. And next, it is my pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Oona Gemsch of Switzerland, making a statement on behalf of a group of countries. So, Oona, the floor is.
Thank you. Mr. President, I make this statement on behalf of Albania, Argentina, Australia, Austria, Belgium, Brazil, Bulgaria, Canada, Colombia, Costa Rica, Czech Republic, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Lithuania, Luxembourg, Mexico, Moldova, Montenegro, New Zealand, Norway, Peru, Romania, Sweden, Turkey, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the Republic of Korea, the United Kingdom, the United States, Ukraine, and my own country, Switzerland. I present a shortened version with the full version on paper smart. We thank the 4 funds and programs for the availability assessment of the common chapter. We welcome that the original intent offered an impetus to enhance collaboration. We also note that a framework for the operationalization, follow-up, and evaluation of the common chapter has not been developed, and therefore recognize that undertaking an evaluation at this point in time might be premature. The common chapter was developed based on the principle that the 2030 Agenda is the overarching framework to guide all our work. The QCPR and the UNDS Reform Resolution 72/279 are clear that UNDS entities should reflect their contributions to the 2030 Agenda in their strategic plans. The common chapter provides an outline for you to take an integrated approach to achieve the SDGs, which is key to the success of the reform. There is proof that the common chapter is beneficial to your work at country level. In the MTR survey, 100% of respondents stated that the common chapter was either a key driver or a positive influence for improved collaboration. As long as there is significant room for improvement for the collaboration between the 4 funds and programs, operationalizing the common chapter deserves your and our full attention. The UN Sustainable Development Cooperation frameworks focus on country-level collaboration and coordination. As long as there is no better alternative that gives concrete strategic orientation for enhanced collaboration at global and regional levels, operationalizing the common chapter must be a priority. We take the point that the common chapter needs to be considered within the broader context of the UNDS reform. The challenges now highlighted in the evaluability assessment are the same challenges we see on a system-wide level. We support the UN system's continued efforts to concretely formulate how the sum of its individual parts adds up to a comprehensive UN system support to member states at country level. In order for the UNDS reform to succeed, there needs to be clarity on where synergies lies and how they are leveraged for a coordinated and efficient UNCT to stand with the RCs. This is especially relevant in the areas of the UN's core mandate of policy advice and normative frameworks. For example, data for the SDGs, gender equality, climate change, or emergencies such as COVID-19 are challenges that cannot be tackled effectively in silos. We expect the 4 funds and programs to demonstrate leadership and implement the common chapter. For us, it is an integral part of each agency's strategic plan. We strongly believe that the common chapter must be fully operationalized with a proper framework in order to be implemented as part of your current strategic plans. The evaluability assessment offers valuable lessons on how this can be done. We will hold you to account not only on the delivery of the common chapter, but we also expect funds and programs to further integrate the UNDS reform mandate of 2018 in the remaining implementation of this strategic plan. Lessons learned from implementation of these elements will guide us in identifying how the concept of a common chapter should be refined for the next strategic plan period. Support towards the achievement of the SDGs will be more effective if we allow the UN system to be more than the sum of its individual mandates. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much for your statement. And next, it is my pleasure to give the floor to Ms. Sarah Offermans from the Mission of the Netherlands, also making a statement on behalf of a group of countries. So, Sarah.
Thank you, Mr. President. And thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak at this session. I delivered a statement on behalf of Austria, Australia, Belgium, Brazil, Bulgaria, Canada, Colombia, Denmark, Finland, France, Georgia, Germany, Iceland, Israel, Italy, Luxembourg, New Zealand, Mexico, Norway, the Republic of Moldova, Sweden, Switzerland, Turkey, the United Kingdom, the United States of America, and my own country, the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Please note that I too am delivering a shorter version of this statement with the full version accessible through PaperSmart. While we continue to stand fully behind UN Women's efforts towards UNDS reform and funding compact implementation, we recognize that work remains to be done, also by member states, to ensure effective delivery, broaden the donor base, and balance core with non-core resources. Therefore, Mr. Chair, please allow me to highlight 6 important points. First, we urge UN Women to keep up with the implementation of their funding compact commitments in order to deliver program results and meet the needs of countries. We want a more in-depth discussion on how the midterm review could reflect on funding compact commitments and urge UN Women to discuss this thoroughly in the lead up to preparing the new strategic plan. Second, we commend UN Women for nearly reaching their target for program expenditure from joint programs. We urge UN Women, however, to keep a high level of ambition in order to reach 25% of program expenditure from joint programs by 2021, as we're concerned that progress is slowing down. How is the strategic plan adapted to further reduce barriers for joint efforts in order to achieve effective program delivery and to ensure more effective collaboration within UN country teams and to support cooperation frameworks? Thirdly, we urgently recommend UN country team members to improve cooperation and work together as one UN under the senior leadership of the resident coordinator. The positive feedback on the joint COVID-19 response under the Response and Recovery Trust Fund is very welcoming in this regard. Relatedly, it's commendable that UN Women has requested its country representatives to discuss UNCT performance for the Personal Performance Management and Development Plan for 2020, and that the respective RC will provide inputs on this performance at the end of the year. Also, we encourage UN Women to continue putting forward strong candidates for the resident coordinator pool by strengthening career path and incentives. Fourth, pooled funds may be useful as incentives for UN agencies to cooperate on achieving results in line with the national priorities. We recognize UN Women's efforts to ensure gender mainstreaming in such pooled funds, for example, through the integration of a gender equality marker in the UN COVID-19 Response and Recovery Multi-Partner Trust Fund. Additionally, the RC system requires predictable and sustainable sources of funding, and we support the Secretary General's call for broadening the donor base and encourage existing donors to continue to provide support. Fifth, we urge UN Women to coordinate with sister agencies in order to ensure that all country and regional team members are receiving consistent messaging and support as the reforms unfold. Sufficient knowledge and resources, as well as full alignment of country strategic notes with cooperation frameworks, is key. In this light, we also wish to encourage UN Women to continue supporting resident coordinators and their UN country teams in leveraging UN Women's knowledge and expertise in countries where there's a non-resident agency, and to participate fully in the ongoing work of business innovations groups to realize maximized efficiency savings. Finally, we commend UN Women for its central role in positioning gender equality and women's empowerment at all levels in the UN system, prominently so in the UN SDCF. In this regard, we also welcome the UN Women added to its own strategic plan the fraction of UN country teams that have conducted the gender scorecard in the past year. It is encouraging, moreover, that UN Women perform strongly and provide gender parity advice and technical assistance. Largely, we urge UN Women to further align to system-wide evaluation practices and to continue investing in its evaluation function. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, and for your statement. And next, it is my pleasure to give the floor to the PR of Nepal, Ambassador Amrit Bahadur Rai. So, dear colleague, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly, so please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you. I'd like to express my deep appreciation to you, Mr. President, and through you to the entire team for your excellent work in the Executive Board of UN Women, even during these testing times. I also thank Executive Director, Madam Phumzile, for her leadership and for her team for the work well done. Mr. President, in our preparations to celebrate 25th anniversary of Beijing Declaration, 20th anniversary of UN Security Council 1325, and 10th anniversary of the establishment of UN Women, we were forced to make unexpected adjustment to our activities to grapple with COVID-19 pandemic. The UN Women has done a commendable job in giving gender lens to confront the pandemic. I'd like to congratulate the UN Women for achieving good performance for 72% of all accessible strategic plan indicators, including 74% of developing results milestones at output level. I wish for even better performance in the days ahead. We believe that it is important to extend the enhanced level of cooperation to member states in strengthening and applying global norms, policies, and standards on gender equality and empowerment of women and girls, including in response to COVID-19 pandemic and its aftermath. And Mr. President, I'd like to conclude by appreciating UN Women's support to its state parties in reporting to the Committee on Elimination of Discrimination Against Women and issuing a guidance note for comprehensive national level reviews of the implementation of the Beijing Declaration. And Nepal remains committed to implementing gender responsive policies and programs at the national level while playing constructive role at the international level. I thank you, Mr. President. I'll submit my longer version's statement. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, dear colleague, for your statement. And I again have to commend you on your use of time. You were 1 second short from your 2 minutes, so really impressive. And next, it is my pleasure to give the floor to the ambassador, the PR of India, Ambassador Tirumurti. And can I, at this stage, also again welcome you to New York and congratulate you on the election of India to the Security Council. You must be one of the most effective ambassadors that I know, in a way, that you haven't been to New York for that long, and immediately you are elected to the Security Council, which is quite a feat. But Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you indeed for your very warm wishes. I truly appreciate that. I thank the Executive Director for his statement and the 2019 report of the UN Women. UN Women's performance in meeting the annual output targets is truly significant. I commend the Executive Director and her team for their strong performance. As the pandemic threatens to reverse the gains of this decade, UN Women will have to continue to sharpen its focus and accelerate its efforts. Women have indeed been at the front line of the fight against COVID-19. As doctors, nurses, midwives, caregivers, and community leaders, women all over the world are working tirelessly to keep everyone safe from the pandemic. We salute them. The first year of the Decade of Action has thrown an unexpected challenge to the global community in achieving Agenda 2030. While COVID-19 has upended millions of lives and livelihood, its impact on women and girls have been severe. This has been highlighted by the Executive Director. India has been sensitive to gender in its development focus. We have been at the forefront of empowerment of women in the political and the socio-economic context. Initiatives like Save the Girl Child, Educate the Girl Child are making an impact on the ground. In the context of COVID-19, recognizing the immediate negative economic impact of the pandemic on women, Prime Minister announced a monthly cash transfer to about 200 million poor women. An interest subvention of 2% for the next 12 months has also been offered to small and medium enterprises run by women who have availed loans under the Mudra Small Loan Scheme as a part of the national stimulus package. The underlying philosophy for this focus on women is simple. When women are economically empowered, they do not just bring income for their families, but they also bring prosperity. Let us also appreciate that UN Women has crossed $500 million in resource mobilization, but the drop in core resources is time. India looks forward to greater cooperation and partnership with UN Women and share good practices. There needs to be a strong development-based approach and also aligned with the national priorities of the countries concerned, particularly during the COVID times. Host to almost 10% of the world's female population, India has a vital interest in the success of UN Women. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, dear colleague, for your statement. And next, it is my pleasure to give the floor to the PR of Japan, Ambassador Ishikane Kimihiro, please. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Yuka, and I really thank Madam Nuka for your comprehensive statement. Well, I wish to make 3 points today. First, in the midst of the unprecedented human security crisis caused by COVID-19, we must work together to minimize its negative impact and build back better a resilient and inclusive society where all individuals, including women and girls, are able to live in dignity and are duly protected and empowered. From this human security perspective, the government of Japan decided to provide a total of $4.5 million in assistance to the 4 UN Women regional projects to prevent infection and mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on women and girls. Second, Japan welcomes the progress being reported in the midterm review. At the same time, we expect UN Women to make further efforts in some areas, including donor reporting, to enhance accountability, efficiency, and effectiveness in all its activities. Third, Japan expects UN Women to play an active role in the UN development system reform. We also hope that UN Women will leverage its triple mandate of normative support, UN coordination, and operational activities for achieving system-wide results on gender equality across the SDGs, including through the multi-sectoral response to COVID-19. In conclusion, in this landmark year for women's agenda, the progress made to date must not be reversed in the face of COVID-19. Japan remains fully committed to promote gender equality and women's empowerment in close cooperation with UN Women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, dear colleague Kimihiro. And next, I would like to give the floor to the PR of Australia, Ambassador Mitch Fifield. Please, Mitch, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. And Yuka, I love your firm hand as chair. Colleagues, COVID-19, it's straining health systems, it's deepening socio-economic inequalities, and changing strategic, political and funding priorities globally. It's also increasing the stakes on gender equality. UN Women's work is vital in the Indo-Pacific, including addressing the spike in gender-based violence, promoting economic resilience, managing the health impacts of the crisis, and advocating for women's meaningful participation in all levels of planning and decision-making. We stand with UN Women as it reprioritises its programs for maximum impact as the needs of women and girls evolve in response to the pandemic. We particularly commend UN Women's ongoing efforts to strengthen collaboration between IFIs and the UN system to ensure measures taken to address COVID are gender responsive, and it would be great to see even more of that. It's essential that UN agencies work together effectively to ensure value for money and complement the work of national governments, regional organisations and other partners. We look forward to UN Women maintaining its important work driving gender equality, maintaining and enhancing women's empowerment through the UN Resident Coordinator System. A recent meeting co-hosted by the Australian Foreign Minister and the Deputy Prime Minister of Samoa affirmed the importance of addressing the needs of women health workers, promoting gender equality, and recognising the vital role that women will play in the region's economic recovery. In the context of resource pressures from COVID-19, we exhort UN Women to incorporate lessons learned from the midterm review during the remaining strategic plan period and also when developing the next strategic plan.
Thank you so much, Mitch, for your statement. And now we've had 10 interventions, and I would actually now give the opportunity to the ED, Phumzile, to perhaps respond to some of the comments and the speeches before sort of the resuming the list of speakers. So ED, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you to the delegates for their contribution. I have noted mostly an emphasis of the areas that members specifically want us to do better or pay attention to. The issue of results, very much on the agenda, the issue of coordination with the sister agency and the UN system to leverage the benefits of the reform, and of course, continued efforts to improve our resource mobilization capability, and also the issue of making sure that we are paying attention to the areas that COVID-19 has exacerbated, which creates, therefore, greater pressure on the work of UN Women. I was glad to hear that many of you as member states feel strongly about the same issues as us. And I do hope that we can, in the further deliberations, get your commitment in the areas that we anticipate difficulties with, such as engaging with the fiscal stimulus and making sure that we engage member states to repurpose them to benefit women. I think all the figures that we see suggest that the recession will be much harder on women. So if we miss out on the stimulus, which have a possibility to invest in women's economic activity, that will be a really big loss. So I'm just putting it out there and urging and asking for your indulgence and support in that regard. And secondly, on the issue of violence against women, which is clearly very high on the agenda on all of you, your support in making sure that we continue to have the services women need so much at this time continue to be declared essential services, not just during COVID, but beyond COVID. So that in the fight to flatten the curve in COVID, we are also continuing to flatten the curve on gender-based violence. Thank you, Madam President Chair.
Thank you so much, Edie. And next, I would like to give the floor to the PR of Guatemala, Ambassador Luis Padilla. So the floor is yours, Luis.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for giving me the floor. I want to begin by thanking and congratulating the Executive Director of UN Women for the presentation of her annual report and for the midterm review of the implementation of the Strategic Plan 2018-2021. Guatemala values the work of UN Women in promoting women's rights and believes that a greater emphasis on gender equality and empowerment in all aspects of our individual and collective work will yield better and faster gains in sustainable development. This human rights-centered approach to development and the programming around it is proof that global solidarity and multilateralism can be effective to tackle common challenges, taking into account and respecting different cultural contexts. In that sense, we emphasize the need for the country's program to be better articulated in conjunction with national plans, priorities, and policies defined by each country, allowing effective implementation and greater impact on long-term results. We think in that regard, the work of UN Women in Guatemala through its different components: women, peace, security, humanitarian response, women's political and citizen participation, economic empowerment, and violence against women and girls, and thanks them further for the role in bringing a strong gender dimension to the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. We would like to know what the long-term increase in emergency response funds will have for UN Women operations, whether this will allow for an increase in support to countries like mine, and to what extent could this be sustainable over time. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Luis, so much for your statement. And next, I would like to give the floor to the PR of El Salvador, Egriselda Lopez. Egri, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador, Mr. Chair, and our appreciation to UN Women Executive Director for extensive report. My country would like to reiterate its support for the work of UN Women. We recognize their capacity and experience in fulfilling their mandate, as well as the leadership to provide a strong voice to all women and girls. The COVID-19 pandemic is deepening gender inequalities, both inside and outside homes. Data from the Latin American region shows a greater vulnerability to gender-based violence, which is exacerbated by confinement and by limited access of women to public services for the care, prevention, and punishment of violence, which in many cases are not considered as essential. Therefore, states must offer alternatives to women and girls to provide them the necessary protection and attention. In this sense, we highly welcome the SG appeal for gender-based violence and COVID-19. The Salvadoran government has taken significant actions to attend the implications this emergency may have in the lives of women and girls. We have enabled a telephone number to provide advice, and a media campaign has been developed to prevent violence against women and girls during the lockdown. Nevertheless, women are not just victims. They play a significant role in the response of COVID-19. For that reason, we must ensure women are included in participation in decision-making and a gender-based approach as central elements of crisis mitigation and recovery policies. As my delegation expressed in the previous segments of the executive boards, El Salvador went through challenging times facing a double emergency. Tropical storms Amanda and Cristobal struck El Salvador while fighting and preventing the spread of COVID-19. Its impacts are more intense on the most vulnerable groups and disproportionately affect women and girls. Therefore, I would like to recognize the assistance of the UN Women and the UNCTs providing to our country. We expect to continue this close partnership. Without a doubt, Mr. Chair and friends, global solidarity is our only way to build a better and a more gender equal world. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And next, I would like to give the floor to the DPR of Argentina, Ambassador Alejandro Verdier. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to UN Women for making this session happen in the current and unprecedented context. My delegation reaffirms its commitment to the entity and redoubles its effort to work together in order to mitigate and contain the multidimensional consequences of the pandemic on women and girls. As you know, Argentina, with the European Union, Mongolia, Morocco, Namibia, New Zealand, and Turkey, has led a joint statement in support of the UN Secretary General's call on gender-based violence and COVID-19, and 146 UN members and observers have joined. Before COVID-19 outbreak, we recognized in Beijing 25 political declaration that significant levels of inequality persist globally, including structural barriers and the feminization of poverty, and that many women and girls experience multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination, vulnerability, and marginalization throughout their life. And they have made the least progress. In the current circumstances, their situation is even worse. And in that sense, we understand that the prioritization exercise conducted by UN Women in light of COVID should be considered seriously as the moment to discuss the new strategic plan. And it is noted in the annual report, the differential impact of COVID is clearly visible in women's increased care responsibilities, disruptions in informal work and formal work as well, lack of access to health services, as well as dramatic increases in domestic violence. That is why we believe that the gender-responsive approach to COVID should involve Argentina supports under these circumstances, and regarding the performance reached during the implementation of the strategic plan, Argentina commends the progress made by the entity in all levels. To conclude, as one of the leaders of the Bodily Autonomy and Sexual Reproductive Health and Rights Action Coalition, Argentina is strongly committed with this Generation Equality initiative. We firmly believe that concrete action needs to be taken to reform Beijing Platform for Action. We highly value UN's women's leadership. Together with Mexico, France, and civil society, we are looking forward to start working to deliver concrete results across generations for girls and women in all their diversity. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. And next, I would like to give the floor to the DPR of Colombia, Ambassador Andres Rugeles. Andres, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Madam Director. Thank you for convening this important session of the Executive Board of UN Women in the current context of the COVID-19 pandemic. I would like to start by highlighting Colombia's unwavering commitment to gender equality. My government appreciates the valuable support of UN Women in the implementation of important strategic actions, such as the creation of the high-level group of the Ombudsman Office on COVID-19 and violence against women. We must continue fighting against this hidden pandemic. Based on the recognition of the differentiated effects of the pandemic and the recognition of the specific needs of women and girls, Colombia has developed concrete actions in areas such as accompaniment and economic support for women, strengthening our economy with a gender focus, encouraging entrepreneurship through the use of digital platforms, education support with emphasis on people in situations of vulnerability, and redistribution of unpaid care work, especially with the Eats for Men and Women campaign. This is the time to show our satisfaction with the achievements in the implementation of the UN Women Strategic Plan. In that regard, I would like to draw the attention to the added value of UN Women in supporting countries to consolidate strategies that promote the economic empowerment of women with an emphasis on productive projects, labor relations, solidarity economy, and care economies. Let me finish highlighting that Colombia encourages UN Women to continue working with other entities of the UN country too. We must ensure that gender equality and empowering women are at the center of the Sustainable Development Agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And next, I would like to give the floor to the DPR of the Republic of Korea, Ambassador Oh Hyun-yo. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to thank our Executive Director and her team for their comprehensive presentation and their continued service during the pandemic crisis. As Executive Director mentioned, it is indeed a challenging time for us all, but it also provides us with the opportunities to identify weaknesses and review our work with fresh eyes. As such, we look forward to seeing the UN Women coming out of this crisis stronger and more resilient. And we, the Republic of Korea, stand steadfastly supportive of UN Women's driving mandates and goals. I'd like to briefly highlight 2 points that are particularly important to my delegation. First, we welcome that the UN Women is on track towards delivering on the results of the current strategic plan. We particularly commend the efforts of the UN Women to highlight the seriousness and importance of domestic violence and gender-based violence during the pandemic crisis. We encourage the UN Women to keep vigilant on this issue and maintain its momentum. We also ask the UN Women to continue making efforts to review its activities to stay relevant in our changing world and strengthen its pragmatic focus. Secondly, the importance of data and evidence is being highlighted as more important than ever before in order to better measure the effectiveness of actions in the context of crisis response and the SDG delivery. As such, we are pleased to see progress made regarding the first data reporting on some of the indicators of the SDG 5 and the prioritization of gender data in UN Women's COVID-19 response. We also welcome the adjustment in the strategic plan with a strengthened focus on data. My delegation encourages UN Women to continue its efforts to enhance data availability on gender equality and keep us informed about collaboration with other agencies in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And next, I would like to give the floor to the DPR of Cuba, Silvia Rodriguez. You have the floor, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to commend the efforts made by UN Women to support countries in addressing multiple impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on women and girls around the globe. I would also like to express my appreciation to the report of the Executive Director and her leadership within the UN through this difficult time. If the work of the UN Women was already crucial before the pandemic, is now indispensable. COVID-19 has been very eloquent in showing the gender disparity that persists around the world. The pandemic is having major socioeconomic consequences for all societies, in particular for women and girls. In confronting the long-standing challenges faced by women and girls, now exacerbated by the multiple impacts of the COVID-19, the UN Women Strategic Plan should continue to be guiding as a guiding tool of our work. In that regard, any possible adjustment or adaptation of the activities encompassed in the strategic plan to ensure its relevance in this new context should be undertaken in full compliance with the UN Women mandate and in consultation with member states. The report identified 5 priorities areas to focus UN Women's response framework that would provide general guidance to the entities work in the context of the COVID and post-COVID era. We are on the view that the response to the impact of the pandemic on women and girls will not be the same everywhere. Hence, the response to these challenges should be better reflect the national realities and circumstances of each country. For that reason, further coordination and consultation with member states should be pursued on the ground to inform UN Women what are the country's priorities and capabilities and how would UN Women and the UN at large better support them. Finally, I would like to reiterate the commitment of my delegation dedication in supporting the mandate of the work of UN Women, which is ever more important in times to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And next, I would like to give the floor to the DPR of the United States. Ambassador Sherry Chalet, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and thank you, Executive Director Phumzile, for your report on the strategic plan. I want to make a few observations now while noting a longer statement for the record will be submitted by us. The U.S. contribution to UN Women of $10 million in voluntary funding for fiscal year 2020 is provided to promote women's economic empowerment, prevent and eliminate violence against women and girls, and advance the women, peace, and security agenda, and should be used as such. UN agencies should also focus or maintain focus on these core shared efforts while also addressing the serious challenges facing women and girls due to COVID-19. The United States reiterates its efforts to defend human dignity, support access to high-quality healthcare for women and girls across the natural lifespan, and believes in legal protections for the unborn. We do not support new agendas or terms that are inconsistent with the negotiated consensus reached by member states within the ICPD Program of Action and its report, or the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action as adopted by the General Assembly. Of note, the Executive Director's report references sexual and reproductive health and rights. This term does not enjoy international consensus, is not found within ICPD or Beijing, and deems access to abortion as essential, despite the fact that there is no international right to abortion. Each nation has the sovereign right to implement programs and activities in support of women's health, consistent with their own laws and policies. The report also states UN Women's support for CEDAW implementation, and I would just note that the United States has not ratified the convention and expects UN Women will respect member state sovereignty and legitimate prerogatives when engaged in this area of work. Lastly, the report describes the Generation Equality Initiative. The United States does not support the use of this initiative to alter the consensus reached at Beijing 25 years ago. The Beijing commitments, the result of intergovernmental negotiations, should continue to be the main accelerators to achieve equality between women and men, and any change to these priorities must be as a result of a formal negotiation among member states. We reject efforts to overturn and supplant the delicate consensus reached by member states at Beijing and to circumvent the multilateral process. And we have repeatedly urged UN Women to address this serious problem. To close, the United States will continue to be a stalwart defender of all women, men, children, and families, and to support programs to improve their health, life, dignity, and well-being. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And next, I would like to give the floor to the DPR of Madagascar, Ms. Andrea Miarisoa. Please, the floor is yours, Ambassador.
Thank you, Chair. Distinguished delegates, Madagascar is committed and supports the work of UN Women, both within the UN family and in the field. Indeed, we are among the co-signatories of the joint declaration initiated and delivered by Sweden. Today, I would like to draw your attention on the following. First, Madagascar is not spared by the COVID-19. To address this global pandemic, a national recovery process was recently launched, which includes gender equality using disaggregated data analysis and studies. Additionally, this process will also take into account other important international tools such as the Beijing Declaration and the Generation Equality Framework. Undeniably, Madagascar acknowledged the leadership role of UN Women in these processes. In addition, we recognize the importance of a strong collaboration between the country team and other agencies. Madagascar is ready to explore ways to close gaps and deliver effective results. And finally, my delegation wishes to express its support for UN Women engagement in the process of repositioning the UN development system and praises the efforts that UN Women, in collaboration with other programs and funds, makes to achieve the implementation of the 2018-2021 strategic plan. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. And next, I would like to give the floor perhaps to the ED if she wants to react again to sort of the statements that have been made. ED, the floor is yours.
I will just want to react to Guatemala about the funding situation of UN Women and whether it would affect their funding. I pray not. We would do our best to maintain the same or not, or if not better, support to member states. But clearly, everything is affected to some degree by the resources that we have. So we do not anticipate, for instance, sudden dropping of the important work that we do with you. We will strive to always be of some kind of support. And we hope that you can also assist us with resource mobilization, of course. And I also note the statement of the US and what they wish their resources to be spent on, the topics that they've highlighted: women, peace and security, women's economic empowerment, and ending violence against women. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ED. And next we will resume our list of speakers, and I will give the floor to the Minister Counselor of Bangladesh, Mr. Iqbal Haroon. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. We commend UN Women for taking into account the challenges posed by the pandemic on women and girls and make necessary adjustment to its programs and priorities to mitigate the crisis. Achieving gender equality and women's empowerment is a core national priority for Bangladesh. Report shows that Bangladesh has closed 72.6% of its overall gender gap and leads in the region in terms of women's empowerment. However, COVID-19 pandemic can reverse the course of such gain. Over 90% of our health workers are women, and they are now at increased risk of exposure. Women make up over 90% of our total workforce in the informal sector as well, and the pandemic has left them jobless and without any protection. Massive job loss is projected in the ready-made garment sector, which is now also predominantly represented by the women. Thousands of women migrant workers have lost their jobs with no hope for reinstatement. Girls are out of school because of the lockdown and are at increased risk of violence, exploitation, and abuse. To address the impacts of COVID-19, we have announced a range of stimulus packages, many of which are designed for women. And these include soft loan for women-headed SMEs and MMEs, compensation for job and income loss of the RMG workers. Women are also receiving allowances under social safety net programs and training for alternative income generating activities, with special focus on vulnerable women. At this critical point, even women has an important role to play to ensure that the gender dimensions of the pandemic are well integrated into the national level response plans and implemented in a sustainable and inclusive manner. It needs to support the efforts of the national governments. At the same time, it must fulfill the mandated existing programs aimed at achieving gender equality and women empowerment under the established global frameworks such as Beijing Platform Action and the Agenda 2030. I conclude extending our support to the board and to the UN Women. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, dear colleague, for your statement. And next, I would like to give the floor to the representative of China, Mr. Xing Yisheng, please. The floor is yours. Do we have the mission of China online?
Hello, Chair. Hello, Mr. President. Would
hello.
you please? Hi, I'm sorry that would you please ask the next speaker to speak first and then come back to us. Sorry for the inconvenience.
No, that's not the problem. We will come back to you in a while.
Thank you.
So next I would like to pass the floor to the representative of Lebanon, Ms. Sharifa, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. This is Amal Mudallali.
Oh, Amal, well, we are honored to have you, so to speak,
Thank you.
with us.
Thank you.
We had someone else on our list. Apologies,
okay.
the PR, you should have come earlier, but
Thank
the
you,
floor
thank
is
you.
yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to thank the Executive Director for her insightful statement and for the annual report of 2018-2021. I also would like to congratulate UN Women for the awareness campaign on the shadow pandemic, which brought to light the issue of violence against women and I'm sure saved lives. This is an important decade for women, and it's full of milestones. I will not mention them, but it was impacted this decade by the pandemic, especially women who were hit by the hardest. But women were not only victims in the pandemic, they were leaders. Every country that is led by a woman did better in response to the pandemic. We are proud of that, and women handle crisis better. Mr. President, since the outbreak of the pandemic, Lebanon has been scaling up work to address the immediate and long-term needs of women and girls. Regarding the fight against the shadow pandemic, Lebanon is proud to have joined 123 UN member states and observers in answering the Secretary General's call on gender-based violence and the COVID-19, and to have focused on this pandemic within the pandemic through multiple measures, including providing access to justice for survivors of sexual and gender-based violence. Mr. President, Lebanon is proud of a strong and close relationship with UN Women, which further deepened during this pandemic and is committed to expanding this fruitful cooperation. The Gender on COVID-19 Lebanon report, produced by UN Women in partnership with the National Commission for Lebanese Women, WHO, UNFPA, helped inform the social media campaign Together and Equal. UN Women has been playing a key role in the socio-economic response to the pandemic in Lebanon as part of a women's economic empowerment project through supporting the rural women social enterprise. Lebanon welcomes UN Women's positive results made on the strategic plan 2018-21, and we look forward for the Generation Equality Forum. Allow me to reiterate Lebanon's strong commitment to UN Women's role in advancing gender equality and women empowerment around the world, and to assure you and the Bureau of our full support. I thank you.
Thank you so much, dear colleague, and it is lovely to see you again. And
thank
next, I would like to give the floor to Ambassador Penelope Beckles from Trinidad and Tobago. The floor is yours, Penelope.
Good. Thank you very much, Excellency. Thank you, President. Mr. President, Trinidad and Tobago wish to extend its sincerest congratulations to UN Women for its hard work and dedication to the empowerment of all women and girls over the years, and in particular during the COVID-19 pandemic. It is clear that the inequalities experienced by women and girls may have significantly increased due to the lack of access to basic resources needed to take care of their families. There may also be a spike in early marriages, as parents see this as a solution to decreasing the burden of the household with less mouths to feed. This is indeed a very troubling and sad reality. Further, our women may not be encouraged to stand up for themselves with the fear and threat of being violated. There has also been an increase in stress levels and mental instability as a result of uncertainty due to this pandemic, which have also led to a spike in domestic gender-based violence, particularly within the Caribbean. While I'm proud to say that my country, Trinidad and Tobago, has done exceptional in management of COVID-19 pandemic, this spike in domestic and gender-based violence remains quite alarming, and in this regard, I am delighted by the continued commitment of UN Women in dealing with this very concerning issue and their efforts in Latin America and the Caribbean. It is of utmost importance that multilateral institutions such as UN Women continue to work together to ensure cooperation at all levels and by fully engaging our governments and civil society. We must be able to have a positive impact on those women and girls in vulnerable situations, such as those living in extreme poverty, affected by climate change and natural disasters, suffering from mental health issues, lost loved ones as a result of the pandemic, and living in the areas of armed conflict. We must acknowledge that when our women and girls are healthy and educated, their families, communities, and societies thrive. Finally, Mr. President, Trinidad and Tobago wishes to express our unwavering commitment to continue to work together with UN Women in order to ensure that our women and girls have both the opportunity and the necessary tools, such as technology, access to healthcare, mental health counseling services, career guidance, food security, and nutrition to fulfill their highest potential. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Beckles. And next, I would like to give the floor to the DPR of Turkey. So, Ambassador Varli, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. I would like to begin by thanking you and Madam Executive Director for her comprehensive statement, as well as for presenting the annual report. Since this board met lastly during its first regular session in February, the world has gone through unprecedented challenges. 2020 was intended to be a groundbreaking year for gender equality. Among others, we marked the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and the 20th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, and the 10 years since the creation of UN Women. However, with the spread of COVID-19 pandemic, even the gains made in the past decades are at risk of being rolled back. Secretary General's policy brief on the impacts of COVID-19 on women and other papers prepared by the UN Women explain how the pandemic is disproportionately affecting women and girls all around the world. From health to economy, security to social protection, the impacts of COVID-19 have been amplified for women and girls due to the existing inequalities. Those inequalities should be addressed at the national and international level. COVID-19 response plans and recovery packages must take into account the gender impacts of this pandemic. With this understanding, I'm pleased to highlight that Turkey will continue to place the gender equality and the empowerment of women at the center of plans and policies. In doing so, we enjoy a sound relationship with UN Women and collaborate on a number of areas. At the end of this year, Turkey will kick off a new project in cooperation with UN Women entitled Gender Responsive Planning and Budgeting in Turkey. With this project, we aim to empower women in Turkey by systematic and sustainable integration of gender perspective at all stages of national and local policymaking and budgeting processes. Mr. President, we commend the 2019 annual report of the Executive Director on the implementation of the Strategic Plan 2018-2021 and the midterm review of the strategic plan. It provides an invaluable source for the progress to date and challenges and opportunities ahead for the UN Women. We believe that the lessons learned from 2 years of the implementation of the strategic plan and the areas identified for improvement in the midterm review should be utilized in the best possible ways to enhance the implementation of the strategic plan in the coming years. Let me conclude by saying that in difficult times like this, it is more important than ever that the UN Women continues to demonstrate leadership across the UN to advance gender equality and women's empowerment. This understanding demonstrates itself within the triple mandate of the UN Women, which Turkey fully supports. I also would like to emphasize that we look forward to engaging in the fruitful discussions that we expect to take place during this annual session of the Executive Board. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your statement. And let us now return to China and check whether Mr. Xin Yisheng is available.
Hello. Hi, Mr. President.
Oh, please
Chinese
go ahead.
delegation. Yeah, Mr. President, China delegation thanks the Executive Director's statement. We thank all UN Women staff and the Bureau of the Executive Board for their hard work despite the current difficult time. This year marks the 25th anniversary of the 4th World Conference on Women. We call for the full, effective, and accelerated implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action We support young women's work in this area, and we also support the high-level meeting of the General Assembly on Beijing Plus 25 to be held as scheduled. Women and girls in developing countries are among the hardest hit by COVID-19. We commend the efforts of young women in implementing its response framework to COVID-19 and encourage young women to dedicate more resources for response and recovery for member states, in particular for developing countries. Emphasis should be placed on critical areas of development, such as poverty eradication, zero hunger, decent work, education, and health for all women and girls. We welcome the progress made by young women on the implementation of the Strategic Plan 2018 to 2021. However, compared with other areas, countries covered by young women's economic empowerment support need to be further expanded. The implementation of the Common Chapter and synergy should be strengthened, especially during COVID-19 response and recovery. We encourage young women to take up the recommendation of the midterm review and continue to enhance performance and effectiveness. Mr. President, China prioritized the health of women in response to COVID-19. Serious measures have been taken to ensure the health and the safety of pregnant women and infants and combat violence against the women. We stand ready to work with the international community to fight against the pandemic. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, dear colleague. And next, I would like to give the floor to the Mission of New Zealand, Ms. Rachel Princh. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and Executive Director. In this 25th anniversary year of the Beijing Declaration, New Zealand is pleased to report the concrete and positive impact of UN Women's work, including in our own region, the Pacific. Although we have made progress, we should not allow ourselves to become complacent. As others have already mentioned today, the impacts of COVID-19 are not gender blind. We are seeing the disproportionate and differentiated impact of the pandemic for women and girls playing out worldwide, and this is increasingly evident in our own region, where we're witnessing increases in rates of violence against women and girls, shrinking access to sexual and reproductive healthcare and services, and unequal harm to women and girls' livelihoods. UN Women is needed now more than ever. Mr. President, New Zealand would like to pose 2 questions. Firstly, global connectivity has been reduced due to COVID-19, and it's particularly troubling for countries dependent on transport links, tourism, and remittances. Women are overrepresented in sectors affected by movement restrictions in the Pacific, with devastating impact on their livelihoods. What steps is UN Women taking to ensure that the most isolated and vulnerable of these countries and communities will be reached by the COVID-19 response? Secondly, the need for a rapid response to COVID-19 may have led to policies and measures which are not appropriately gender responsive. We also note that many gender-focused high-level events this year have been scaled back or delayed. How will UN Women, using its normative and advocacy roles, ensure that issues affecting women and girls remain top of the global agenda? Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much for your statement. And next, I would like to give the floor to the representative of Algeria. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Do you hear me?
We hear you.
I would like to thank the Executive Director, Mrs. Pemzeli Mombo-Nukba, for the presentation of her annual report and for her leadership and commitment to the realization of UN's women objectives and priority. Algeria takes note of the report of the Executive Director and the results achieved by UN Women in implementing the Strategic Plan 2018-2021. Mr. President, this year marks 25 years since the Beijing Platform established the guiding principles to promote and uphold the commitment to women's empowerment. However, due to COVID-19, the commemoration of this milestone document has not been possible. I would like to take this opportunity to pay a special tribute to the women throughout the world who are playing a major role in the response against COVID-19. They represent nearly 70% of the frontline health and social workers worldwide. We must therefore ensure that women are included in all of our response and recovery policies. We believe that UN Women has an important role to play in this regard. 2019 has been a cornerstone year for Algeria. A peaceful expression of the Algerian aspirations has led my country to start a new path in its history, with the election of His Excellency Abdelmajid Tebboune as the new President of the Republic of Algeria. Since he took office, the President of the Republic has nominated several women as ministers or at the leading positions in the national institutions. He has also put in place policies and mechanisms that are responsive to women's needs and ensure their participation in the decision-making processes. The Algerian government is committed and will always be to the empowerment of women, as well as to combating all forms of violence against women and girls as a key part of its national policies. In this regard, the Algerian government implemented the National Program of Action on Combating Violence Against Women and reinforced the legal protection and accompaniment mechanisms for women and girls victims of violence. In the context of COVID-19, the existing mechanisms have been strengthened to face the disproportionate consequences that this pandemic creates on them by putting in place helplines and shelters across the country to ensure that the protection from is guaranteed. At the international level, Algeria has always been committed to the achievement of gender equality and women's empowerment. In this regard, Algeria has been honored to co-facilitate and lead the negotiations for the adoption on March 19 of the political declaration on the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration and Platform of Action at the 64th session of the CSW. The adoption of the declaration by consensus crystallized the commitment by all delegations to tackle the remaining gaps in the implementation of the 12 critical areas of Beijing Declaration and Plan of Action to achieve gender equality and women's empowerment fully and effectively. All of our efforts have been supported by UN Women Country Office in Algeria, for which we expressed our support. This office assists to advance the status of women in my country and strengthen collaboration on gender-sensitive implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Let me conclude, Mr. President, by reiterating Algeria's appreciation and support for UN Women's work and the actions taken within its mandate to ensure the advancement of the principle of gender equality and women's empowerment throughout the world. And I thank you.
Thank you for your statement. And next, I would like to give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation, Ms. Guzanova. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will also present the short version of my statement and circulate the full version via Papersmart. Mr. President, with the COVID-19 pandemic, the United Nations system, including UN Women, will need to adjust their activities to assist member states upon their request in achieving tangible results relevant to the context and challenges. While more men are dying as a result of COVID-19, the socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic may disproportionately affect women, especially in countries under unilateral economic coercive measures that undermine the capacities of developing countries to respond to the pandemic. This year, as we celebrate multiple anniversaries, there is still a lot to be done to empower women and provide them with the same opportunities as men. Special attention should be paid to the needs and vulnerabilities of women as mothers and caregivers. In this regard, we urge UN Women and member states to focus on quality social and economic support for women, especially in the current circumstances. More sustainable results can be achieved when the international community works together on the basis of broad consensus and mutually respectful dialogue. It is disappointing to see that the Generation Equality Forum, which was supposed to bring different stakeholders together to accelerate the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of women, becomes a platform for the promotion of non-consensual concepts and approaches. Obviously, any outcome of this forum cannot be considered as being supported by all UN member states. Mr. President, UN Women's efforts across its 5 outcomes of the strategic plan remain relevant. Bearing in mind the existing division of labor and ongoing reform in order to avoid duplications in the work of the UN system, UN Women has to remain strictly within its mandate and contribute to the efforts of other entities and relevant or thematic bodies on the issues of promotion of gender equality. Thus, we're confident that UN Women should continue focusing on its thematic areas, especially on those where the targets set in the strategic plan have not been fully achieved. In the face of COVID-19, it is particularly crucial to prioritize assistance to the COVID-19 recovery efforts and sustainable development, with special emphasis on poverty eradication, addressing unemployment, as well as unpaid care and domestic work, and strengthening social protection systems to support women. UN Women has to respond to requests from member states in line with the imperative of national ownership, aligning with national priorities. We urge UN Women to use its successful practice of early, inclusive, consultative, and transparent process of consultations with member states in the development of its next strategic plan, while taking into account lessons learned and findings of the midterm review of the current strategic plan. I thank you.
So much. Thank you so much for your statement. And next, I would like to turn to Mexico, to Dr. Christopher Balinas Valdez. Doctor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President and Executive Director. Given the global COVID-19 context, we are aware of the impact of the crisis on women's lives. The health emergency has made visible the importance of women in the different economic, social, and political sectors of our country and worldwide. For this reason, it's necessary to incorporate more women in the leadership and decision-making process to face the pandemic and beyond in order to promote a fairer and more prosperous development of our societies. The rights of women and girls must be guaranteed in all circumstances and with a special emphasis in this type of situations. Therefore, we recognize the efforts of UN Women to achieve equality between women and men. Hence, we celebrate and welcome the action that UN Women will do to promote gender equality during the COVID-19 crisis, such as the creation of the comprehensive database available to the public on the impact of COVID-19 on gender.
You may have come unmuted.
You're still muted. Mexico, I'm sorry, you are still muted.
For some reason, the system keeps muting me. Shall I start again?
Please do. We lost some 20 seconds, so.
Okay. Therefore, we recognize the effort of UN Women to achieve equality between women and men. Hence, we celebrate and welcome the actions of UN Women will do to promote gender equality during the COVID-19 crisis. Mr. President, I would like to reaffirm Mexico's commitment with gender equality and with international initiatives that promote all human rights of women and girls. Given the rescheduling of the Generation Equality Forum towards the first half of 2021 due to the pandemic, it's important to recognize the sustained political commitment of UN Women and the government of Mexico and France. We are convinced, especially now, that the objectives of the forum remain stronger than ever. The contributions of the Generation Equality Forum will be significant in generating strategies to combat COVID-19 from a gender, human rights, and intersectional perspective without leaving anyone behind. On behalf of the government of Mexico, thank you very much. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much for your statement. And next, I would like to turn to Norway. Dear colleague, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank UN Women for the comprehensive and clear annual report and for the very interesting presentations made by Åsa, Anita, and the ED. My comment relates to the composition of UN Women's funds and the consequences it has for UN Women's mandate. So I would really ask the management of UN Women to elaborate on how the reduced share of core funding affects your ability to carry out your normative and coordinating mandate. And I think these aspects of the mandate is always very important, but especially now in light of the need to respond to the consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you for your very compact question. And next and last but not least, I would like to turn to Ambassador Silvio Gonzato, the DPR of the EU delegation. So Silvio, the floor is yours, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Jukka. It's a pleasure, and it was fascinating to follow the discussion. I would like to thank the Executive Director, first of all, for her energy and commitment to women's rights. Her briefing was really inspiring, and in order not to overburden proceedings, the EU as a donor statement has been submitted in writing. So let me just ask a couple of questions. We're very happy with the collaboration that we have with UN Women, but also with other agencies, funds, and programs in the context of the Spotlight Initiative, which, as you know, is there to fight violence against women. And we're also encouraged to learn that, according to UN Women, most new resident coordinators integrate gender issues now in their broader work of the UN in their countries. But my question to the Executive Director is whether she feels that the Spotlight Initiative has helped UN Women and other participating agencies like UNICEF, UNFPA, UNDP to work more effectively together, and thus has played a role in increasing their contribution to the reform of the UN development system. My other question concerns civil society. We all know that during COVID, they've been struggling economically, but also that the restrictions that were imposed by COVID-19 measures have limited their outreach, their capacity to reach out to people in need. The EU has committed 15 million euros to ensure direct and flexible support to women's and grassroots organizations. We've done so through the UN's Trust Fund to End Violence Against Women and the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund. My question is, how is UN Women concretely supporting civil society organizations and women human rights defenders during the crisis? And what are the issues that we as international community should be paying attention to in this context? Thank you, Jukka.
Thank you so much, Silvio, for your very, very concrete questions. And now I think that we have exhausted the list of speakers. And I note that there are sort of some very concrete questions to the ED and the Secretariat. And New Zealand posed a question on connectivity and how to maintain the gender issue sort of on top of the political agenda. Norway had a very concrete question about the impact of core funding, and at the end, Ambassador Gonzato sort of had two very concrete questions about the Spotlight Initiative and civil society. But so could please, Edie, would you like to respond to the statements and to these very concrete questions, please?
Thank you, President. I'm going to ask first Anita to talk about the impacts of the limited core resources, because this is obviously a question that is important to many member states. Anita?
Thank you, Edie, and thank you for the question. Indeed, not having the right balance between core and non-core resources poses a risk to UN Women, both for its own financial sustainability, but also importantly, it impacts our ability to work with others and to fulfill our normative and coordination mandate to its fullest potential. So let me concretely mention a few specific impacts. First, not having enough core resources means that there is a risk of strategic fragmentation in what we do, meaning we will be driven by opportunistic funding, which can lead to us focusing on things that are not central to the mandate. So the first risk that is very clear is strategic fragmentation. The second is that in order to fulfill the normative and coordination function, we actually need expertise. So it is very difficult to continue to influence UN country teams if we have a policy expert who is in his or her job for only a set amount of time. We need to have the assurance that the person can stay for a certain period of time in order to be able to carry out the mandate. Third, research and evidence. In order to really build a substantial program
that is fact-based and that allows us to continue to become the go-to organization. We need predictable funding, which is typically core funding, in order to continue to invest in our knowledge base. And fourth, I would say the implication of not having the right balance of core and non-core is our ability to plan long-term. And that ability to plan long-term makes it very difficult for us to be able to work in the same way that we would like with other funds and programs. I do think there are developments that are helping to address this. The MPTF is allowing us to partner with other agencies and to drive more joint programming. So we are very hopeful about expanded support to the MPTF. But for UN Women itself, we see that it is essential to have flexible and predictive funding, because it also is necessary for us to be agile and responsive in the face of crises such as this, and to lay the groundwork and do the preparedness work for future crises. Thank you, and over.
Thank you, Anita. Let me start with the question or advice from China about strengthening our work on women's economic empowerment, and say that I totally agree that we need to do more than what we're doing now on women's economic empowerment. Just in the space of COVID, so many of our women partners who are women's organizations are actually now in the business of providing and producing PPE, something that we are encouraging, because then they generate income for themselves, but also they provide an essential service for their countries in that way. But we're looking at how we could also make sure that that leads to them producing other important goods that will be needed post-COVID, such as sanitary pads and dignity kits, providing linen for public sector procurers such as hospitals, and this would be part of us scaling by making sure that in all of the countries where we are seeing this trend amongst women, we encourage them to stay and grow on that lane. But also our real obsession, if you like, with fiscal stimulus is exactly to see how we could strengthen women's economic empowerment, because women in the informal sector are likely to lose out. Women who do small business are also likely to lose out. So in adapting to this moment of Corona and the types of economic activities and the support that is available, we are also making sure that we can play a useful role in advising government. And again, I want to say, because fiscal stimulus is something that governments do, we need you as member states to be our partners, to use our briefing notes to contribute to them, so that we can guide the stimulus to make to have an empowering effect on women's economies. And New Zealand, I would say that we are making sure that women's interests are not neglected as a result of COVID. Our intervention range from engaging with governments who are moving resources, for instance, from shelters that are needed for women who are affected by violence, and moving those resources to providing places where they can isolate COVID positive persons. And we are trying to secure those resources to stay with women, and not just during COVID, but beyond COVID. And we are also calling for them to be increased. We are looking at how COVID affords us an opportunity to get into the new normal in a way that is transformative, as I'm saying, in the case of gender-based violence, but in economic activities as well. Whatever we are supporting governments to do for women, businesses of women that are not registered, we are trying to help governments in some cases to register these businesses so that they would then always be in a position to know where to find them and how to support them. We are also looking for simplification of the information that comes from government where there is help so that it is easily accessible to women. We also intend to encourage and push for women's leadership, starting with the women in the health sector, because while women are in large numbers in the front lines, they are not sitting in the decision-making table, but also to look at that in relation to leadership everywhere in the world. Data obviously is needed for the long term so that we have evidence to show what is happening to women. Another area we did not really talk about today, which is of concern to us, is girls, is the threat to girls' education, as schools have been closed for such a long time. And that is where Spotlight resources are very important. Encouraging communities, traditional chiefs, and parents and schools to make sure that they track the girls and they make sure that girls return back to school. We've been alarmed in Kenya, for instance, the number of girls who have become pregnant just during this time. Alarmed to hear about, even though it's anecdotal, we have not compiled this evidence effectively, but anecdotal and convincing suggestions that child marriage is increasing this time. And between ourselves, civil society, and of course, UNFPA, UNICEF, we are looking at this in countries that are affected, and Spotlight resources are very, very critical for that. On issue of generally Spotlight has been very important for us to protect essential services for women and to open pathways for the services to be delivered where women are and for women to leave places where they are in danger in order to accept services. We have used these resources to help countries establish hotlines, which have been very helpful because hotlines have been able to give us the trends about what is happening to women, as well as to extend the shelters and the services that women are able to get in shelters. We're continuing also to inform policy as well as law enforcement at this time. I can truly say without fear of contradiction, if we did not have Spotlight resources, we would never have been able in GBV to have responded as swiftly and as quickly as we did. We are also supporting civil society. And I did say that in Africa already, between Spotlight and the Trust to End Violence Against Women, we have supported civil society in sub-Saharan Africa to the tune of $9 million and still going far. And I think this is one very concrete activity for grassroots institution building that has taken place in the midst of a pandemic, because these organizations stood up and wanted to be counted. We're running out of resources, and our presence and ability to support them quickly made a difference. Algeria, I would just like to assure you that be it CSW, Security Council Resolution 1325, possibility to mark the 20 years of its implementation, or UN Women 10, we all see those as important dates and commemoration, which will make sure that we are not slowing down in supporting and making the women's agenda visible, but we strengthen the visibility of the agenda to the extent we can under current circumstances. And again, I want to say again, we need your support. We need you to be there. These things work when we are working in partnership with yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Edie Phumzile and Edie Anita. And actually, I have one further sort of speaker on my list of member state interventions. Dr. Sharifa Al-Zahrani from Saudi Arabia. So Sharifa, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll deliver a short version of the statement, and the longer version will be uploaded to the PaperSmart. We all perceive the significance of 2020 as it marks milestone anniversaries, both for UN and for women, making it a pivotal year for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. It's also a challenging year for the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals and the empowerment of women and girls, proving the urgency of a system-wide approaches and further collaboration between relevant UN agencies, as well as strong regional and international partnerships. As the current Women 20 presidency, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia's theme of putting women at the heart of the G20 adds to the pillars of labor inclusion, financial inclusion, and digital inclusion that have been introduced by previous G20 presidencies, a fourth pillar of inclusion in decision-making. As a member of the Executive Board of the UN Women and Commission on the Status of Women, the Kingdom reaffirms the importance of ensuring that UN Women is responsive to the needs and priorities of recipient countries, as well as stresses taking into account lessons so far learned from COVID-19 to ensure better preparedness in the event that similar crises occur in the future. Having said that, I would like to have 2 points. Number one, multilateralism is crucial, a message that was underscored repeatedly at the general debate of the 74th session of the UN General Assembly and emphasized by the Kingdom as the current G20 presidency, stressing the importance of multilateral coordination and cooperation to navigate complex global challenges and protect vulnerable population segments, especially women. This requires UN Women to leverage multilateral partnership within and outside the UN to support greater results for women and girls. Second, utilizing lessons so far learned from the dealing with COVID-19, especially in relation to women and girls. For instance, Saudi Arabia's whole government approach involves women in the response and recovery decision-making, either through the Family Protection Department at the Ministry of Human Resources and Social Development, or through women increased role in private and national institutions. Secondly, particular consideration to domestic violence in light of COVID-19 through all women staff call centers operating 24/7, intensified cooperation with the security authorities, and remote counseling for all cases being referred to family protection units. In the end, a word of acknowledgement and encouragement to UN Women in providing support to member states and continuously attempting to promote partnerships and capacity building. The Kingdom, as always, encourages more cooperation between UN Women and GCC countries, looking forward to further progress in the implementation of UN Women's 2018-2021 strategic plan. I thank you.
Thank you so much, dear colleague. And this really concludes the list of speakers. So I think that, well, it is 1 o'clock, but since we have concluded the list of speakers, we do not need to resume at 3 o'clock with the speakers. And I would ask for your indulgence if we take a few minutes more so we can invite sort of the members of the Secretariat, starting with the ED, if they want to sort of respond to any of the interventions and further questions. And this will also provide the opportunity for sort of other members of UN Women also to respond. But let's start with the ED. Phumzile, the floor is yours.
Mr. President, I do not have any more issues to raise other than to thank the member states for their deliberations, and to ask if you could indulge us by encouraging your countries to volunteer to cooperate with us on reviewing the stimulus. My colleague Sarah, who has been leading this work, will be made very happy if you made the information available and you collaborated with her and her team and our colleagues in the different country offices. I also just want to say to member states, the Secretary General made a call on addressing the issue of violence against women. 145 countries answered positively, and maybe through your leadership, Chair, we can make those countries the friends of ending gender-based violence in COVID and beyond, because it is an impressive number. And we were really pleased to see that, as well as the countries that responded to the SG's call on the global ceasefire. Again, it's an important constitution for our women, peace and security agenda. They can galvanize us as we move towards marking the 20 years of implementing the women, peace and security. Thank you very much, Excellency, my team and everyone, my DEDs, we all appreciate your continuous support and guidance. And we'd like some money. Thank you.
Thank you, Edie, for your kind words. And I think that we've come through with the money this year. So let's hope for future years as well. And I really share your sentiments in how to sort of make the best out of this sort of terrible COVID-19 crisis, that we have to emerge much better out of this. And but before concluding, I just want to check with both DEDs, Anita and Åsa, if you would like to add anything before we close.
From my part, Mr. Chair, I also want to thank for the support for the work that we do. And I note a strong demand and interest in data, statistics, evidence, facts, and to sharpen whatever we do with that. And that is also a direction that our work is taking, not least under Sarah Hendricks' leadership, but the whole organization together when it comes to policy and programs. So that is one thing that I noted. I also want to thank for your support for efforts in the violence against women and also in the economic empowerment areas. It's very good to know, because as you point out, that those are very important areas to work with. And also when it comes to support for civil society. And as I think you heard, we have been working very closely with the civil society in the world to both get a hold of their experience of changing trends and difficulties due to the COVID time. And with that knowledge, try to support them very hands-on in the countries where we are. So thank you for mentioning that. Yeah, I think I'll stop there in the interest of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Åsa. And can I sort of ask Anita, DED Anita, for sort of some closing sort of words?
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'd like to make 3 points. First, very much appreciate the point on the need to maintain the correct balance between core and non-core funds. And we look forward to continued focus on flexible and predictable funding so that we can indeed fulfill our normative and coordination mandate at its fullest potential at the country level. Second, we hear the calls for us to focus and continue to deepen our focus on coordination. And of course, this point is linked to the first. And we are very pleased to just mention that the MPTF is really enabling us to be able to drive some of that joint work at the country level, and we will continue to do that. And so we encourage funding not just to us, but also to the MPTF to help drive that. And finally, we take to heart some of the comments that Australia in particular and others on our continued work with the IFIs. This is, of course, linked to the point that the Executive Director made on maintaining a focus on the stimulus packages. I think it would be fair to say that from what we have seen in our conversations with our regional directors and our country teams, that while the stimulus packages, which are the single largest source of funding for countries today on implementation of the recovery efforts, have a focus on gender, in theory, in practice, that focus could be much, much sharper and could be strengthened. So we seek your support in this work, because without influencing that, we will not really be able to influence how countries build back better. Thank you, Mr. President. Over.
Thank you very much, Anita. And can I also sort of thank the whole UN Women leadership team, the ED and the 2 EDs you made. You make a very effective team, and we are thankful for it. And before closing this segment, well, since Sarah Hendricks was mentioned many times, so I would like to give Sarah the chance to sort of perhaps for a short comment. Sarah, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and thank you indeed to everyone for what has been a very meaningful and I think substantive conversation this morning. I have just 3 comments that I'd like to make. The first is an explicit comment in response to the questions that were posed by the EU delegation, specifically on our support to civil society through the UN Trust Fund, as well as the Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund. Simply just to say that we will have an informal with the board this Thursday, this Wednesday, which will go into more detail around what we have unpacked through a rapid assessment of 144 civil society organizations across all 5 regions vis-a-vis the UN Trust Fund, specifically in terms of the ways in which CSOs are being impacted in an alarming way on violence against women globally, and what they are reporting to us around co-occurring risk factors, as well as the influence of their work on essential services. We will be sharing with you explicitly the impact of COVID-19 on civil society organizations, as well as the very explicit programmatic adaptations that we are making as UN Women, inclusive of the points that our executive director has already highlighted, such as the allocation of an additional $9 million to 44 sub-Saharan African grantees in partnership with the EU and with the Spotlight Initiative, in order to respond very pragmatically to the impact of COVID-19 on civil society, and to equip civil society organizations to be able to respond to COVID-19 effectively in their own context. The second point that I'd like to make is to just further reference to the data and statistics exemplars that were raised by a number of interventions today, and to highlight the ways in which we see that really coming together across so many parts of our work, not only to advance more data-informed decision-making within UN Women, in order to enable and equip us to prioritize our efforts across our strategic plan, but to see this as also something that realizes our broader coordination and triple mandate efforts in service of COVID-19 and our response on COVID-19. We are delighted to have been partnering together with UNDP, with WHO, and with other UN agencies in order to advance clear sex disaggregated statistics, and in order to ensure that a rapid assessment vis-a-vis data informs our collective understanding of the realities of women and girls' lives and their understanding of impact from COVID-19, and how we as collective partners can respond with that data in mind. And the third point that I would like to make really is to underscore just the continued thread of communication on the fiscal stimulus packages. I think DED Anita Bacha highlighted how significant this is in relationship to the work on IFIs, as did DED Osa Renier and our executive director. And so I look forward simply to working together with all of you in driving forward the utilization of a tool that UN Women has developed, and ensuring that this equips governments as well as the whole UN system to effectively assess, as well as shape fiscal stimulus packages so that they have a sharper and more focused effort on gender equality. With that, again, I thank you for this chance to have the floor, and back over to you, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And in sports term, I think that we are already on overtime. So I think that we are soon about to conclude. And since there are no further requests from the member states for the floor, we can close this segment, and thank you. And we are now sort of approaching the end of the morning session, and I suggest we suspend here and break for a quick lunch. I'm at least looking forward to the sandwiches I made this morning. And then you are invited to join the informal consultations on draft decisions. But let me first give the floor to the Secretary for a quick and gentle reminder. Jean-Luc, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'll be as gentle as possible. And I want to congratulate, number one, on how efficient you were this morning. We had 30 speakers on the list and we managed to do it until now, so it's very good. Just a quick reminder that, so because we finished the speakers list, we will not, I repeat, we will not resume the official session this afternoon. We will just focus on the negotiation on the draft decision for the 4 decisions, one after the other. Since it's already 1:15, I would suggest we take a 30 minutes break and we resume on Zoom on another link, different link, at 1:45, and then we will go until we negotiate the four decision. And then the official session will resume tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. on another link of Zoom. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
Thank you so much, Jean-Luc, and we can the first plenary meeting of the session is therefore adjourned, and I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow at 10 o'clock for the next plenary meeting, and very good luck for the negotiations this afternoon, and many thanks for all your help and your understanding in conducting the meeting in a way that, well, this is a first for all of us, having an annual session, the UN Women annual session, in virtual format, but many thanks to all delegations in being so cooperative, and really looking forward to seeing you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you, Mr. President.